So hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is the part 4 of the story, being reborn into the Uchiha clan. Make sure you have watched the previous parts of the video before watching this part. And sorry it took so long. I was really busy, you see, and I still am, but you guys have been waiting for quite a long time already, so I pushed myself to upload this part for you all. If you guys enjoy this what if and want next part of this video, comment down below to let me know. And before I start, please do support for more awesome contents and leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And share this video with your friends and also check out the descriptions and check out the playlists. With that out of the way, let's start. Chapter 31. Chains. The next morning I found Conan in the tower room pouring a cup of tea. It was well before dawn, but Nagato was noticeably absent. Is Pain-sama still angry with me? I asked. I was hoping for a chance to apologize for my indiscretion last night. I was not Naruto. Even if I shared the same message of peace and understanding, it would be meaningless. Naruto was well known for his ability to talk others into peace, but he always performed a bit of percussive therapy first by beating them into the ground. Calls for peace always seemed more credible when they came from a position of power. As for me, well, my current position was the exact opposite. He was never angry with you, said Conan. Your words simply reminded him of someone precious to us, and those memories opened old wounds. Ah, right. Yahiko held the same beliefs. Nagato had confirmed as much. Of course it would hurt to hear the words of his long-lost friend. I frowned. What do you think about what I said? I asked cautiously. Now that I thought about it, I didn't recall Conan speaking a single word last night. She'd been conspicuously silent during the entire discussion. I think that I will follow God on whatever path to peace he chooses to take, she said evenly. And wasn't that interesting? Did that mean that she didn't actually agree with Nagato, but was following him out of loyalty alone? I opened my mouth to ask, but Conan cut me off. He has requested that you take the day off, and I've already sent word to the hospital to reschedule your procedures. Oh, okay, I said, startled. Why? He wishes to spar with you, said Conan. I blanched. I thought you said that he wasn't angry, I said. That sounded pretty angry to me. He merely wishes to gauge your abilities, she said softly. Sure, the timing was purely coincidental and totally not a reminder that he didn't need to kill me to make me suffer. I'll take you to him now. Conan led me deeper into the base to a massive rectangular arena. When we arrived, she handed me a pouch with an assortment of standard ninja tools like kunai, shuriken, exploding notes, and the like. I fastened it to my thigh and she gestured me toward the lower level where Pain stood waiting for me. Then she retreated to an upper balcony where Nagato observed us from his walker. Those who do not share your ideals will crush you for possessing them, said Pain as I approached. If you wish to see the world you desire, then show me your resolve. By what? I stared, wide-eyed. Pain seemed to understand my hesitation. My intention is not to harm you, he said. Nor will I move from this position. Attack me with all of your power so that I may see the extent of your abilities. Now come. It wasn't like I could tell him no. I activated my Sharingan and started with basic Taijutsu boosted with chakra enhanced speed. Pain simply brushed me aside with an almighty push. Okay, that was probably about what I could expect for any physical attacks. While he pushed me away, I met his gaze, trying to land a Jinjutsu. But using Sharingan-based Jinjutsu against a Rinnegan went about as well as expected with him snapping out of it before it could even take hold. By the time his almighty push ended, I was on the other side of the arena. I blitzed forward, counting the seconds until Pain activated the technique again. I decided to take the opportunity to try out Shisui's body flicker clones in the real world. I'd only used them inside Itachi's Jinjutsu, and I discovered to my dismay that all I could manage were a few embarrassingly fuzzy afterimages. Still, it was almost enough for me to set an exploding note on Pain. Almost. Because my 5-second window of opportunity ended with him pushing me back again and the exploding note detonated harmlessly away from both of us. When he let up a second time, I raced forward once again. If I only had 5 seconds, I didn't have time for distractions or tricks. I created 2 shadow clones and sharpened my chakra into a chakra scalpel. Then I went for a direct attack. He blocked my arm with a basic strike and threw me down before punching my 2 shadow clones out of existence. The impact with the ground wasn't enough to injure me, but I was dazed long enough for him to push me away again. This time I hesitated. That was basically everything I had. Except the Haration, which I couldn't use thanks to the manacle on my wrist. Despite my earlier fears, Nagato didn't actually seem particularly mad, just focused. But his lack of ire didn't actually help much. I wasn't a heavy hitter. I didn't have a one-hit takedown technique like Rasengan or Chidori. My main skills focused on evasion and concealment, things that were decidedly limited in a training room. Unfortunately, I simply didn't have anything that would work against him. Pain seemed to sense my dilemma. "That's enough," he said with no hint of inflection to reveal his thoughts. Still, he didn't exactly look pleased. Sorry, I'm not strong like my brothers," I said, feeling guilty for wasting his time. Which wasn't fair because I hadn't asked for this. Even so, I was ashamed at how much our fight had turned into a total walkover. I mean, even if this was only a single path of pain, I hadn't expected to do well against him. But nothing worked. I couldn't even touch him. "Perhaps," said Nagato, descending from the upper levels to stand beside his pain body. "Your genjutsu is passable, but your physical abilities are insufficient for combat. You were a student of the legendary Kakashi of the Sharingan, correct?" "Yes," I said, though if I was perfectly honest, I'd actually learned more from Genma and Guy. It felt wrong to think that, but it was true. "Kakashi did well to teach you the Sharingan," said Nagato. "He hadn't, actually. Pretty much everything I knew about the Sharingan came from Itachi, but I wasn't about to divulge that little tidbit to Nagato. But there is more to your potential. You told Conan that you are part Uzumaki. I too am descended from that broken clan, and there is something I wish to show you. Watch carefully." Confused, I activated my Sharingan and focused my chakra sense on his hand as he held it out in front of him. He compressed his chakra and a barbed purple chain appeared from his palm. He took the end of the chain and pulled it out, stretching it between his hands. "These are known as the demonic statue chains," said Nagato, holding them up for me to examine. I leaned in close to take a better look, noting the structure and flow of chakra. It wasn't just chakra. The chains were infused with seals. They are formed using the outer path of the Rinnegan. However, the Uzumaki clan has chakra that is uniquely suited to create similar chains called adamantine sealing chains. I hadn't realized that the Uzumaki chains were derived from a Rinnegan technique, though now that he mentioned it, it seemed obvious. The Uzumaki were descendants of Asura, so clearly some of Hagoromo's abilities had been passed on in some limited capacity. Just like how Indra had passed on the Sharingan to the Uchiha. But unlike the Sharingan, chakra chains were a hidden jutsu, which was a bit like a trade secret for clans. Technically anyone could learn a hidden jutsu, but some were more suited to it than others. "You want me to learn how to make the adamantine sealing chains?" I asked, guessing at the reason behind this sudden demonstration. Nagato nodded. "I wish to see the extent of your potential," he said. "Okay, but why?" I mean, I wasn't about to turn down training from Nagato, quite possibly the only person who could teach me this jutsu. But why? I opened my mouth to ask, but I stopped. No. Nagato's motives didn't matter. Not really. I'd been with the Akatsuki for a year and a half, but between working at the hospital and healing Nagato, I hadn't had time to grow much stronger. My only real training was 1 month with Itachi and whatever kata I could squeeze into my schedule before bed. I wanted to help people, I really did. But if I continued like this, I would only be a burden to the ones I cared about. I couldn't afford to waste time with pointless questions. "May I?" I asked, holding up a hand. Nagato nodded and I touched the chain. Ouch. My Sharingan instantly deactivated as my chakra was cut off and a searing pain radiated from my hand. My eyes watered, but I didn't release the chain immediately. Instead I studied the flow of chakra from the chain, how it solidified my chakra and prevented it from being molded. The structure of the chain was interesting. I'd seen solidified chakra before in the form of Niji's chakra plugs. But while those were crystalline in nature, this was more metallic. Solid but malleable. Once I was sure how it worked, I released the chain and my chakra flowed once more. I flexed my aching fingers and numbed my pain receptors before touching the chain again. That was better. My chakra was still cut off, but at least it didn't hurt. "It's layered with chakra suppression seals similar to the one on the manacle," I said aloud. "But it's tied to the energy of the chakra rather than something physical like ink." It wasn't too different from when I placed my Hiraishin formula using only chakra, but instead of being a single point on a surface, it was a continuous thread, a repeating pattern that occupied three-dimensional space. Actually it was rather similar in shape to a barrier, but it didn't have termination points, instead able to continue infinitely, or at least as far as the chakra chain could extend. I released the chain and focused on my own chakra, compressing it into a point at the center of my palm and attempting to mimic the metallic feel of Nagato's chain. I then molded it into the same chain-like shape and infused it with the repeating seal pattern. Then I pulled. A delicate golden chain as thin as ninja wire appeared in my palm. I pulled it out about 2 feet, dismayed at the small size. I glanced up at Nagato, expecting a look of disappointment. But to my surprise, his expression was soft. Pain stepped forward and held out his hand. I draped the chakra chain over his palm and his chakra cut out. It was not, I noticed, enough to completely remove Nagato's control of the pain body. "Good," he murmured. "Let us try this again." Nagato retreated back to the upper balcony and Pain stepped back, releasing my chain. He said. I stared wide-eyed and open-mouthed. He wanted a rematch. But what difference was my dainty little chain supposed to make? I looked down at it and took a steadying breath. Well, after that disastrous first round, my performance couldn't get much worse. I closed my eyes for a moment, planning out a potential attack. Yeah. Okay, that was worth a try. I opened my eyes and drew chakra into my legs, launching forward and closing the distance in a fraction of a second. It was a straightforward attack with zero chance of making contact, so I was completely unsurprised when Pain used almighty push to send me flying back. But that was expected. My real chance would come during the counterattack. When the almighty push cut out, I rushed forward again. I had only a few seconds to work with before the cooldown ended, but with my speed that was more than enough. I dropped a smoke bomb on top of Pain, obscuring his vision. I then used the fraction of a second I had left to toss a loop of my chains around him before the cooldown ended and he used almighty push to shove me back. This time he flung me to the far end of the training room and crushed me against the wall for a second before letting up. The force was enough to steal the breath from my lungs, but that didn't matter because I pulled on the chain. It snapped around Pain, catching his legs and cutting off his chakra. He took a moment to consider his situation as I leaned against the far wall and took deep gasping breaths. I concede, he said. I barely had a moment to feel the tiniest bit of pride before he spoke again. I no longer see the need to hold back quite as much. Then he flared his chakra and my chain exploded like superheated glass. And then he proceeded to walk all over me. Again. I'd hoped that the sparring would be a one-time thing, but for whatever reason Pain decided to turn it into a weekly occurrence. I warned him that the extra exertion would extend the length of his healing by several months, but he didn't seem to mind. I wasn't sure exactly what Pain was hoping to accomplish. I couldn't imagine ever being strong enough to challenge him, but I would be a fool to turn down the opportunity to train. And train I did. I couldn't claim that our fights were realistic. Pain was always very careful to never hurt me. It was a little bizarre when I thought about it. Gentle wasn't a word I would normally associate with someone like Pain, certainly not during a fight. But I couldn't think of a better way to describe the mindful care he used with me. It was a word I made sure to use the next time Itachi returned for healing, though if Itachi's troubled frown was any indication, he was not particularly comforted by this fact. Ani-chan, do you know why Pain-sama would want me to become stronger? I asked within our usual genjutsu. Do you think he wants to use me against you? After weeks of training it was the only theory I could come up with. Nagato, Obito, and Itachi were not allies. In fact, their goals made them enemies, though they were currently operating under an uneasy alliance. Nagato wasn't foolish enough to think that it would last forever. Itachi closed his eyes in consideration as he thought. His motives are unclear to me, he admitted. But if Leader Sama wishes to teach you, you should learn all that you can. I grimaced, but yeah. I doubted that Nagato would ever get into a direct confrontation with Itachi, mostly because Itachi was being very careful to play the part of obedient subordinate. And getting stronger aligned with my goals as well. By now I had enough chakra to make dozens of clones, so even spending a few hours a day working on the adamantine sealing chains was enough to make startling strides of progress. After several more weeks of training, my chains were as thick as my wrist and strong enough to prevent Pain from shattering them. Far from being satisfied with my progress, Pain took this as a sign to invite the Asura path into the fight. If I thought that one path of Pain was difficult to deal with, it was nothing compared to two. Worse, Pain was no longer content to stand in one location while using almighty push to keep me at bay. Instead the two paths were free to move around the arena and the Asura path could fire missiles at me from anywhere in the room. Thankfully the missiles were effectively blanks, producing only a small explosion and flash of light, but they were enough to let me know that if they were real, I would be dead. Once it became obvious that my chains alone would not be enough to handle both of them, Pain took me aside. When you stand for your ideals, you must be prepared to stand alone, he said. You cannot always rely on simply capturing an adversary or allowing another to deal the finishing blow. When outnumbered by superior opponents, you must be able to remove them from the battle permanently. I winced. I don't really have any big attack jutsu, I muttered. While on Team 7 I'd never really needed any. Between Kakashi, Naruto, and Sasuke, direct attack power was more than covered. Then we will make you one, said Pain. Do you know your elemental affinity? Wind, though I've never trained with it, I said immediately. And I think I have a secondary affinity for lightning. I'd mimicked a lightning ninjutsu with ease while healing hinata during the preliminaries. That would only be possible with at least a partial affinity. Impressive, said Pain. It wasn't, really. Secondary affinities weren't exactly rare. Haku had equally powerful wind and water affinities. And while Sasuke was a lightning type, he had a strong secondary affinity for fire, which was how he was able to master the fireball jutsu after a week of training when he was only 6 years old. The Rinnegan grants me mastery of all elemental nature transformations, Pain continued. Wind and lightning are complementary natures. Wind has the strongest natural cutting properties, and lightning has the greatest piercing power. Lightning also has a variety of secondary abilities such as numbing and paralyzing targets. For now, we'll begin with generating pure elemental chakra. Conan, who was standing on the balcony with Nagato, leaped gracefully over the rail to land beside us. My elemental affinity is also for wind, she said. She held up her hand and a small piece of paper appeared in her palm. She placed it between both of her hands and flared her chakra. When she opened them again, the paper was cut cleanly in two. The cutting power of wind chakra is derived from the chakra grinding against itself like a whetstone sharpening a blade. When pure wind chakra is shaped properly, it can cut through almost anything. As for lightning, its power comes from exciting chakra to the point that it dissolves the chakra bonds in whatever it touches, said Pain, taking one of Conan's papers and placing it between his palms. He too flared his chakra and when he opened his hands, the paper had turned to confetti. Now it's your turn. Conan handed me a piece of paper. I placed it between my palms and flared my chakra. When I opened my hands the paper was still mostly intact with only a small nick in one side. That wasn't great. But Pain seemed unbothered. Raw elemental transformations take time to master, he said. Continue to train like this until you are ready for the next step. I nodded and got to work. With Pain's words in mind, I expected that I would need several weeks of training to reach the next stage. But with the help of dozens of shadow clones, I was able to cut the pieces of paper with both wind and lightning chakra by our very next sparring session. Even Pain seemed impressed. I expected the next step to be him teaching me an attack ninjutsu, but to my surprise he instead decided to focus on mobility. I couldn't say that I was complaining. I didn't particularly want to hurt anyone, not even Pain. Maybe he sensed some of my reluctance or maybe he was still considering the best type of attack for my fighting style. Either way, I was happy when Conan demonstrated a technique for creating a cloak of wind chakra around my body, which would allow me to slide right through the air, reducing friction and increasing speed. It could also be used as a cushion to prevent injuries from long falls and could even generate enough lift to glide for short distances, though I didn't have the paper wings that Conan used to keep herself aloft. Pain also taught me a similar technique for lightning which not only increased my speed but helped to shield me from physical attacks. I could only do one technique at a time though, so I had to choose which one worked better for a particular situation and be able to switch between them if needed. Unfortunately, speed training with Pain was both invigorating and utterly terrifying. Prior to this I'd been stagnating in terms of speed. It wasn't until I trained with the Asura path that I realized I'd simply been lacking proper motivation. There was nothing quite like having the Asura path carpet bombing the entire training arena to inspire new levels of haste. On the plus side, I fully mastered Shisui's body flicker clones in record time. The training never got any easier, either. After 2 more months, Pain brought in the animal path as well, which once again turned our matches into a total walkover. Even if I managed to wrap the summons in chains and cut off their chakra, they were large enough to just step on me. And that was before I considered the actual paths of Pain. No matter how fast I was, I couldn't handle 3 of them at the same time. Shadow clones made it easier to fight multiple opponents, but it divided my chakra and I already wasn't about to win any battles of attrition against Pain. I had to get creative and that led to another extracurricular activity. Weaving barrier seals between my chains. I had a bit of practice with this already since I'd done something similar with ninja wire during the invasion to evacuate the stadium. But instead of using the barrier for the Hurration, I needed to create something strong enough to stop the animal path summons and keep them from squashing me into the floor. This was no easy task since it required creating dozens of chains at once, weaving barriers into the gaps, and infusing them with enough chakra to stop the supermassive summons. Nagato once again had advice to offer. He showed me how to strengthen my barriers by tying them into the suppression seals so that I was creating one seal with multiple functions rather than 2 seals on top of one another. Not only did this make the barriers easier to form, but they were massively reinforced by the power of the chains themselves. I was a little shocked by Nagato's depth of knowledge regarding seals, but I probably shouldn't be. After all, he was a Rinnegan-wielding Uzumaki trained by Jiraiya and whose life goal included sealing giant chakra beasts. I just didn't think of him like that. It was easy to think of Nagato as simply a Rinnegan wielder and nothing else. But he had a truly astounding breadth of knowledge. He simply didn't use most of it because he didn't need to. The Rinnegan was always enough and that just showed how truly, monstrously powerful it really was. But even with Nagato's help strengthening the barriers to the point where the animal path summons were no longer a threat, I still had to fight the actual paths of pain. If it weren't for the Sharingan's enhanced levels of perception, I would never have managed it. But still, I eventually hit a wall in my training. No matter what I tried, I couldn't handle 3 paths at once. Itachi had no real advice for me either when he came for his next healing session. He simply suggested that if Pain saw the limits of my abilities, his interest would fade. So I shouldn't push myself too hard. In theory, it was good advice. I didn't want Nagato's undivided attention. But still it hurt to hear Itachi say that, though I wasn't quite sure why. Besides, as it turned out, Nagato was not so easily dissuaded. Shortly after Itachi's departure, Nagato relented and actually removed my space-time suppression manacle for the duration of our sparring sessions. I was still strictly barred from using the Hiraishin on myself, but I was now allowed to use it on him. This resulted in an interesting application where I could teleport the paths of pain around the battlefield if they touched me or my chains. It also allowed me to deal with the Asura path by placing dozens of Hiraishin seals on all of the paths of pain. If he threw a bomb at me, I'd simply teleport it on top of another path. He stopped using bombs after that. Mostly. After several more weeks of intense training, I was able to teleport away any physical attack no matter where it touched me. The downside was that teleporting an opponent away didn't actually hurt them, so it had limited benefits. Still, it was enough to keep them off of me, and that allowed me to tip our matches to my favor. Pain took this as a good time to introduce the pre-top path, which could absorb all of my chakra techniques, including my chakra chains. And I was summarily steamrolled again. There wasn't much I could do against the pre-top path. As soon as it touched any of my chains, my ability to channel techniques through that chain was eliminated. And that was pretty much its job in our matches. The pre-top path never fought directly. It just cancelled my abilities. I could kinda sorta get around it by having multiple networks of chains, but the paths of pain were so perfectly coordinated that the pre-top path would simply create a safe spot for the others to destroy the chain networks. I spent a few weeks struggling to find a strategy that would work against it until I had to admit that I was well and truly out of options. This left me in a bit of a predicament because Nagato showed absolutely no signs of easing up on me. And on top of that, I had another thing to worry about. We should go to open together. I said, and not just because I was hoping for a reprieve from the weekly beatdowns. I looked between Conan and Nagato, who stared back, nonplussed. You know, to celebrate. Pain-sama has been cooped up for years, unable to go out and enjoy the festivals. Now he has a chance since he doesn't need the walker anymore. Let's all go together. If we went together, there was no reason for Obito to be my escort. I do not wish to be seen, said Nagato. Oh, but that's the best part, you don't have to go as yourself, I said. You can be my Ajisen. Just put on some sunglasses and no one will know it's you. Please, Pain-sama. Just for a little bit. Just for an hour. Nagato gave me a look before letting out a small sigh. I suppose an hour would be fine, he said. Yes, and you'll need yukatas too, I said, because it wasn't a summer festival without the proper attire. And if I wanted to drag this out as long as possible, well, that was no one's business but my own. As it turned out, Nagato and Conan already had yukatas. Conan's was a bright red with a white and black floral pattern, while Nagato's was black with a geometric red and white pattern. Conan also changed up her hairstyle, creating an elaborate updo with dozens of tiny paper flowers in a variety of different colors and designs. At my eager request, she styled my hair the same way. Do I look nice, Pain-sama? I asked, twirling in my own yukata. You look fine, he said. Conan-sama too? I asked. Nagato paused. Yes, he said, and I thought I caught the faintest tinge of pink in his cheeks, which was interesting. I never got the impression that Nagato felt that way about Conan. Still, they both needed a bit of positivity in their lives, and casual compliments were an easy way to do that. Pain-sama looks nice too, I said. Then I capped my hands. Okay. Let's go. The sky was once again clear and bright as we set out into the late afternoon. This year the main village square was filled with booths and stalls surrounding a large stage where performers were entertaining people. We started with a few simple games. I couldn't convince them to try the ring toss, but I managed to wheedle a few rounds of katanuki out of them. Conan was the most successful of us, while Nagato kept accidentally snapping every single one of his candy pieces. Hey, there's a ninjutsu play next, I said. I see some open seats near the back. I scampered off with Conan and Nagato trailing behind me. The seats weren't the best, but that's what we got for showing up late. The show was fairly impressive. A group of AIM shinobi used wind and lightning ninjutsu to perform a play, an old legend about a pair of noble warriors attempting to save a captured princess. Pretty standard stuff. Have you determined a strategy for our next sparring session? Nagato asked during the intermission. I made a non-committal sound. Nagato merely nodded as if this was what he had been waiting for. When all other methods have failed, the only option left is to attack, he said. But I have been attacking, I objected. Nagato gave me a look. No, you haven't, he said. Not truly. You hold back. Tell me, have you ever fought with the intent to kill? Well, my last real fight was against Gaara, and although he'd been trying to kill me and my team, could I honestly say that I'd tried to kill him too? No. I'd turned his attack back at him, and I'd hit him with a few exploding notes, but I could just as easily have hit him with 100, enough to destroy his sand and end his life. But I hadn't. I could say that it was because I knew he would become our ally one day. But that wasn't the whole truth. I hadn't tried to kill him because I didn't want to kill him. My silence was all the answer Nagato needed. Before our next match, try infusing wind and lightning chakra into your adamantine sealing chains, he said. This will allow you to injure targets with your chains, rather than simply restraining them. Ah, so that's why he chose to start with mobility techniques instead of jumping straight into a heavy-hitting attack jutsu. He knew that I would be reluctant to truly hurt anyone as long as I felt that there was any possible alternative. By letting me reach my limit on my own terms, even allowing me to use my Hiraishin, he was forcing me to acknowledge that there wasn't always a non-violent method of resolving a fight. Despite this, a part of me still wanted to object. I didn't want to hurt anyone. And yet. I swallowed thickly. Channeling lightning chakra through the chains seems fairly intuitive, I said, my voice oddly distant even to my own ears. But what about wind chakra? It's typically used on blades to extend their reach and increase their cutting power, right? But my chains are smooth. Nagato med. Only if you want them to be, he said. Right, of course. Nagato's demonic statue chains had little barbs on them, so what was preventing me from creating little bladed protrusions? Nothing really. Except I didn't want to. Nagato opened his mouth to speak, but there was a sudden flare of chakra from his ring, and he frowned. I'm afraid this is all for tonight, he said. Conan and I have business we must attend to for the next 3 days. During that time we cannot be disturbed, so your morning and evening healing rituals will be cancelled until we've finished. 3 days. That could only mean one thing. One of the Akatsuki members had captured one of the Jinchuriki, and they were going to seal it away. My heart skipped a beat, but I smothered the sudden burst of fear. It couldn't be Gaara. It was too soon. And obviously it wouldn't be Naruto. He had to be sealed last. I nodded mutely as Conan and Nagato vanished in a burst of body flicker, leaving me alone. I could do something maybe. For about 5 seconds before pain descended on me like an angry god, and then what? Nothing good. Not for me or Itachi. And not for the Jinchuriki, who was probably in no position to escape. It was like Nagato had said. Some enemies simply couldn't be contained or fended off. And those enemies were the type to destroy everything and everyone in their paths. How many people would Pain, Obito, and Madara kill? Too many. Far, far too many. Violence didn't have to be my first option, but it did have to be an option. Not just for me, but for everyone I wanted to protect. That was what it meant to live in this world. I sat in silence as the festival continued around me, unaware of the life that was slowly being snuffed out even now, as I sat powerless to stop it. That night, I began work on redesigning my chains. I spent a fair bit of time experimenting with different shapes and applications. After quite a bit of trial and error, I decided on a design that looked like a cross between chains and razor wire. Infusing the multitude of small blades with wind chakra produced the best results, but it was also hard. I was already producing the chains, infusing them with seals, and wielding them as a weapon around the battlefield. Adding what amounted to thousands of tiny wind chakra blades was more than I could handle. That was at least until I took a page out of Naruto's playbook and dedicated the task to a shadow clone. The result was startling. I was able to shred anything that came into contact with my chains. And shred I did. It wasn't like the pain bodies were people, right? They just looked like people, but they weren't. Nagato was uninjured when I damaged the pain bodies, and that was the important part, right? Right. The first time I destroyed a path of pain, I still froze in horror, certain that Nagato would be angry. But he simply summoned the Naraka path to reassemble the broken path. I breathed a sigh of relief when it emerged from the mouth of the King of Hell, looking no worse for wear, and Nagato took that as a sign to add the Naraka path into the fray, not as a combatant, but as a mechanism to repair the other paths as I destroyed them in battle. This was also when I tried adding a second clone in addition to the first, this one channeling lightning chakra. The results were even more impressive, mostly due to the fact that lightning chakra actually strengthened wind chakra, so the effects were greater than the sum of their parts. I could now simultaneously seal, paralyze, and obliterate any target my chains could touch. I could no longer describe it as shredding due to the fact that Pain and I now routinely had to sweep up the broken paths of pain off the floor with a broom. I hadn't meant to create the ninjutsu version of a giant blender, and yet here we were. Nagato also took this as a sign to add the human path to the fight, mostly to bolster the number of combatants and to keep me busy, while the Naraka path repaired the other damaged paths. Unsurprisingly, when faced with the totality of Pain's power, I did not do well. Sure, I could counter most of his attacks, but I didn't delude myself into thinking that I was actually a serious threat to him. Despite using every single path against me at once, Pain never actually put a scratch on me. And it wasn't due to my abilities. That was for sure. He wasn't taking the fight seriously. He was still being careful. It was almost like he wanted to lose, though that thought made no sense at all. But it made no difference. In the end, he had too many overpowered abilities and too much chakra. NGH, I groaned, flat on my stomach in the middle of the arena. Where once there had been an orderly room lined with pillars, now there were only scattered piles of rubble. The walls were covered in scorch marks, and I lay in a nest of broken chakra chains. The Diva Path stood over me with a sharpened rod of metal pressed against the back of my neck. Defeating Pain was impossible. "Do you wish to continue?" he asked blandly. "NGG," I moaned. The whole room swam as I struggled to remain conscious. "She is chakra exhausted, Pain," said Conan from the observation balcony. As a censor, she knew exactly how little chakra I had left. It would be dangerous to continue. After a long moment, Pain lowered the sharpened rod. The other paths of Pain retreated, but I remained where I was, unable to do more than twitch. There was no possible way I was getting back to my room under my own power. Oh well, it wasn't like I'd never slept on stone before. Pain knelt, easily lifting me up and resting my head against his shoulder. I let out an indistinct sound of objection, but he paid me no mind as he carried me back to my room. I considered protesting more, but there wasn't really much I could do. So I remained limp in his hold and promptly passed out. Chapter 32. Excursions. "Have you not been sleeping well?" Conan asked. It was a reasonable question since I was currently dozing on her lap despite it being midday. The arrangement was a little awkward at first, but this was the easiest way for both of us to fit on Nagato's back as he did one-finger push-ups. I hummed, pressing my face into the fabric of her Akatsuki cloak. I hoped Itachi would return to aim soon. I always slept better when he was around. Still, I felt almost at peace nestled in Conan's arms. This was how Makoto had held me when I was young, and Nagato's movements felt like gentle rocking. Conan even stroked my hair, which felt nice. The only ones who'd ever done that were Itachi and Achan, I mumbled, slipping into a deeper doze. Conan's hands stilled, and there was the slightest hitch in Nagato's rhythm before he resumed his push-ups. "You'll take tonight off from training," said Nagato, which was enough to pull me back from the brink of sleep. I was about to object because I wasn't that tired, but he continued. "I have a healing mission for you in the Land of Waves. It will take approximately 2 weeks, and you should be ready to set out at dawn." That was enough to make me blink fully awake. "So you've decided to proceed?" Conan asked. "Yes," said Nagato. He was on push-up 387 of 500 and wasn't showing any signs of slowing down. If the intelligence he provides is accurate, it may be our best chance. "Conan, you will accompany them?" Conan nodded and resumed stroking my hair. I looked back and forth between them. "Is someone else coming along?" I asked. "Please don't be Obito." Thankfully, it wasn't. Unfortunately, it was someone almost as bad. Or rather, a pair of someones. "That's the healer?" Hayden asked the next morning as we prepared to set out. For the journey I'd been given my very own tiny Akatsuki cloak and an equally undersized conical hat with paper streamers. It was a little strange to wear the cloak when I wasn't an official member of the organization, but since I was taking a mission on behalf of the Akatsuki, I supposed that I needed something to symbolize my association with them. Hayden bent forward to loom over me with his 3-bladed scythe resting casually on his shoulder. "What are you, for?" "Okay, I did not look that young." "I'm 15, I said tartly. Hayden, Kakuzu, and Conan all stared at me. "What?" Hayden guffawed. "You've gotta be kidding me. A little brat like you? No way." "My appearance is a side effect of my healing ninjutsu," I sighed, not particularly enthused about detailing my situation. Conan was frowning in confusion. Wait, had Itachi never mentioned my real age to her? Surely she must have noticed that I hadn't gotten any older in the past 2.5 years. And she'd never said anything. "Ah, so you're not a kid, you're just a midget," said Hayden. "How many weirdos can one organization have?" Oh, that probably explained it. Nobody talked about Kisam's fishy biology or Sasori's puppet body either. Or Dodara's mouth hands or Hayden and Kakuzu's immortality now that I thought about it. Actually, Itachi and Conan were the only normal ones in the Akatsuki. Nagato might also fit that description, but since he frequently piloted a set of robotic corpses, I considered him an honorary member of the Akatsuki's Weird Body Club. "Stop wasting time," growled Kakuzu. "We have a tab to settle." Yeah, money, money, money," grumbled Haiden, straightening as we all followed Kakuzu out into the early morning light. "It's always about the money with you, isn't it? Hey, midget, have you ever heard of the way of Jashin? When you worship Jashin, you can kill as many people as you want." "I already kill as many people as I want," I said. "None." "Seriously?" he asked, his face scrunched in confusion. "There's gotta be somebody you want to kill." I wanted to say no, but I hesitated. There was evil in this world. People like Orochimaru, Danzo, and Black Zetsu. They had killed many and would kill more. They were also personally responsible for much of the pain and suffering in my life and the lives of the people closest to me. Could I really say that I didn't want to kill them? "No," I said softly. "There are those I want to stop from doing terrible things, but I don't want to kill anyone. If there's even a small chance of working things out so that everyone can live, I will do that instead." Aiden's eyes narrowed. "That sounds positively heretical," he said with a sharp unfriendly grin. "It's pissing me off." "That's enough," said Conan, her flat rebuke drawing Haiden's irritated gaze. He huffed and turned away as we continued on. The fastest route to the land of waves involved cutting through the land of fire. We moved with stealth through the trees, avoiding towns and other ninja. Thankfully we encountered no one along the way. It felt a little odd to be hiding from my own village, but if they saw me with the Akatsuki, I'd be immediately branded as a missing ninja. Not to mention the fact that my current companions would kill any Konoha ninjas on sight. No, I was perfectly happy to pass through the forest undetected. Though it wasn't an entirely quiet journey. Haiden pestered me constantly about converting to Jashinism, which I steadfastly refused. The very idea that someone might not want to kill people seemed completely foreign to him, but thankfully Conan was always there to keep the peace when his confusion bubbled over into irritation. Kakuzu also threatened to kill us all if we didn't shut up, but thankfully he never got as far as the actual killing. It wasn't long before we reached the Great Naruto Bridge, now decorated with festive banners for New Year. The sight of it made something ache in my chest. It felt so long ago, and yet the paint still looked fresh, the stone new and only slightly weathered from the salty air and crashing waves. As a gust of winter wind swept across the water, I almost thought that I would see Haku if only I turned around. But that was silly. He wasn't here. He and Karen were safe in Konoha. The others did not seem to take heed of my hesitation, but their pace slowed as I rushed to catch up. We met the client, a man named Hatu, in a quiet, well-kept mansion near the coast. He was short and wide with sandy brown hair and deep wrinkles along his frown lines. There was something vaguely familiar about him, though I couldn't quite place his features. He had a small number of disreputable-looking retainers who eyed us with barely disguised contempt. At our arrival, Hatu raised his eyebrow. "You expect me to believe that this is the genius medic?" he asked, disbelief written clearly across his face. "Is this some kind of joke?" "The Akatsuki has always provided exemplary specialists for our missions," said Conan blandly. "She has more than enough skill for your needs." "She can be older than 6, the man objected. "I'm 15, I said, annoyed at my apparent age being brought up again. "If you will allow me to begin, I can perform the diagnosis and initiate treatment." "DCH, for the information I'm providing, I expect only the best," he said. "If I am not satisfied with your results, there will be consequences." It was posturing, probably. Surely even a civilian would know not to threaten the Akatsuki. He wasn't a lord that I recognized and he didn't wear any visible clan insignias. But money was its own kind of power and it might lead him to think that he actually had some sway over S-ranked missing ninjas, no matter how foolish that thought sounded to me. I bowed deeply. "You will not be disappointed," I assured him. It was a good thing that civilians were less sensitive to killing intent than ninjas or the man would be dead from Kakuzu's aura alone. The quick diagnostic jutsu revealed that he was suffering from kidney disease, a severe case of gout, and some pre-cancerous spots on his skin. I provided the diagnosis, presented a treatment plan, and got to work. I went slowly because I wanted to be extra thorough. Still, it only took about 20 minutes, and that was stretching it out for as long as reasonably possible. In that time, 58 new chakra signatures gathered in an adjoining room. There was something off about them, something sickly and toxic. I glanced at Conan, who must have sensed them too, but she seemed unbothered. "The procedure is complete," I said. "You are in excellent health. The only thing left to resolve is payment," said Kakuzu with a scowl. "The location of Orochimaru's most recent base." That made me perk up. "HMPH, well, that is dangerous information to provide," said Hatu as he stood up and retreated to the far side of the room. He gestured to one of his retainers, who opened a side door. 58 men with weapons filtered into the room. So they were the source of the strange chakra. Orochimaru-sama is not someone I would like to consider an enemy. You must understand. I could only stare in disbelief at the implication. Wow. Sure, civilians didn't always fully understand the difference in strength between various shinobi, but did this man really think that Orochimaru was more dangerous than the 3 Akatsuki members standing right in front of him? Judging by his smug smile, apparently yes. My brother Gato was a fool, but he did know how to deal with shinobi, Hatu added. Huh, so that's why he looked familiar. Or at least he did until the incident with Zabuza. I'm not one to make the same mistake. Orochimaru-sama was generous enough to provide me with some higher quality bodyguards to deal with you. The guards shuffled forward and black marks began spreading over their faces as their chakra became even darker. Curse marks. They were not, I noticed, anywhere close to the power of Sasuke's curse mark. I doubted that they would even register as a threat to any of the Akatsuki. So, your betrayal was intentional, said Conan, still perfectly calm. There was an issue with the payment you provided to our associate for your last mission. We were willing to extend an opportunity to rectify your mistake, however. Byakugan's bloodlust suddenly intensified. His arms split apart at the joints and hundreds of black tendrils emerged from his limbs. We've decided to extract our own payment. Your life, said Byakugan. Hatu spread his arms in a welcoming gesture. I'm sure you'll offer me an entertaining demonstration as you come to understand Orochimaru-sama's true power. This man was delusional. It was a delusion that didn't last very long. I kept my gaze turned to the ground, but I couldn't block out the screaming. Conan stood guard at my side, shielding me from the worst of it, though she needn't have bothered. I could still sense everything, from the agonized writhing of chakra before it was snuffed out to the way Kakuzu's string slithered through the floor to snare hapless victims. I tried to think of something, anything else. Maybe I could try hiding my chains in the floor the same way Kakuzu hid his strings. The pre-top path was only able to disrupt techniques it could touch, so if it couldn't touch my chains, I might be able to capture the other paths more easily. I focused on this train of thought with grim resolution as Haiden and Kakuzu finished off the rest of the guards. My eyes remained downward as Haiden joyfully extracted the information on Orochimaru from Hatu. According to Hatu, Orochimaru had been using him as a smuggler for illicit experiments, and the most recent base was on the southern tip of the island. Man, what a waste of time, said Haiden when his ritual was complete. Why bother healing him if we were just gonna kill him anyway? Might as well just skip to the fun part next time. I agree, said Kakuzu, nudging Hatu's mutilated corpse with his foot, turning the body to reveal a face frozen in the agony of a slow death. What was the leader thinking, giving this one a second chance? We should move on to Orochimaru's base immediately, said Conan, ignoring the question. If they were working together, Orochimaru must know that we're coming. We don't have much time. Wait, really? You're going after him now? I asked. Conan turned to me. Is that a problem? She asked. Well kinda. On the one hand, I didn't exactly want to get caught in a battle between the Akatsuki and Orochimaru. On the other hand, if Orochimaru was on the island, then so was Sasuke. If Conan and the others ran into Sasuke, he'd fight them for information on my whereabouts. That wouldn't end well for him. At best, they might leave him alive because of Obito's command, but Haiden and Kakuzu were both psychotic murderers who didn't let petty things like orders get between them and killing people. I gripped the space-time suppression manacle on my wrist. It would be easy enough to break, and if I had access to my Hiraishin, I could spirit Sasuke away to safety. But if I did so, I'd have to be ready to abandon the Akatsuki and Itachi. It would mean being hunted down by Obito, but if I had to choose between that and Sasuke's death, I'd take being hunted. No, it's not a problem, I muttered. Conan regarded me for a long moment before kneeling down and unclasping the manacle. Orochimaru is an unpredictable foe, she said. If things get dangerous, you have my permission to teleport somewhere safe. Wow, that was a lot of trust. But this would hardly be the first time they'd put their faith in my obedience. I nodded and we set out to the location indicated by Hatu. We arrived just after dawn. Conan sent out paper angels to map the area and Kakuzu led the way into Orochimaru's base. I did not particularly want to pay attention to what was happening, but I had to keep my senses on the lookout for Sasuke's chakra. We didn't encounter quite as much resistance as I'd feared. There were a few guards which were easily dispatched by Kakuzu, but that was all. They were low-level fighters, likely staff, prisoners, or experiments. None even had the curse mark. We swept through the entire base finding no sign of Orochimaru or Sasuke, and I wasn't sure how I felt about that. Well, there was one small sign of hope. In one of the long tunnels of unadorned apartments, I paused. Conan continued a few steps before halting. There was something familiar here. I rested my hand on the door and pushed it open. Yes, it felt like him. Looking around, there was nothing in the room to indicate that it was his. There were no personal effects or markings on any surface. But his chakra was still here, embedded into the floor and mattress. I could even feel it in the air. In time it would fade, but for a moment, just a moment, I sat on his bed, closed my eyes, and allowed myself a moment to feel. This was Nai-chan's room, I said quietly. He hasn't slept here for at least 3 days. It was so faint. I'd only felt his chakra because I'd been searching for it. He's gone then, said Conan, frowning in clear disappointment. I do not sense Orochimaru either. It seems that we're too late. I nodded, both relieved and not. I shook my head. No, it was better this way. I would see Sasuke again soon. But not now. And there was one thing I could do while I was here. Do you mind if I look around a bit? I asked. Orochimaru might have left behind research that I can use to help others. Specifically, he might have left behind something related to the curse mark. Hatu's guards were proof that some type of curse mark experiments were going on here, and anything that might help Sasuke was worth looking into. It was unlikely that Orochimaru would leave anything valuable behind. But if he'd left in haste, then maybe, just maybe, there might be something I could use. Conan agreed, and it didn't take long to locate Orochimaru's lab. It was a grotesque den of horrors. There were bodies hanging from the walls, and only most of them were dead. Conan paced around the room, and each of the remaining chakras vanished as she passed. It was a mercy considering the state Orochimaru had left them in, but I did not look at her work. Instead I focused on the shelves upon shelves of books. Most were laboratory notebooks with raw data. They were messy and incomplete as almost all AB notebooks were. It was Conan who located the most valuable information in a small chakra-sealed storage container behind a discreet hidden door. The curse seal, she said, brushing an index finger over the expanded version of the curse mark diagram in the notebook. The actual seal went on for over 20 pages. And these are I said, skimming another notebook detailing various experiments including Ito Tensei and Hashirama cells. Yes, and there was also a vat of cells with various preservation seals. Orochimaru must have taken some from Konoha before leaving and was using them to strengthen the binding of the Ito Tensei jutsu. We cannot linger here, said Conan. Take whatever you need and examine it later. I nodded, putting the notebook safely in my bag and tucking the jar of Hashirama cells under my arm. Okay, now we can go. Upon our arrival in AIM, I tried to return the tiny Akatsuki cloak, but Conan insisted that I keep it. She also did not return the space-time suppression manacle to my wrist. Odd, perhaps it was a test, or maybe they really did trust me now. Either way, I wasn't about to object. It would make things easier for me if I ever needed to flee. But for now I had work to do. The Akatsuki base possessed several fairly well-outfitted labs, mostly thanks to Orochimaru's brief tenure in the organization. Until now I'd avoided them for their grisly associations, but with my newly acquired notes, I set to work parsing out the secrets of Hashirama's natural healing ability. It wasn't easy. Notes were just that. Notes. This wasn't a book or even a well-documented research paper. There were bits missing, unintuitive leaps in logic and understanding that probably made perfect sense to Orochimaru, but which left me scratching my head in confusion. Still, with time and a squad of shadow clones bouncing ideas off of each other, I slowly began to piece together a picture of what he'd been working on. It's pretty gruesome, but the information is amazing, I said to Nagato as we ate breakfast. This was our first shared meal in several days. Itachi was also in the village, and he too had been busy, not even returning to our room for sleep. If I can get it working, I can do so much like heal blindness and regrow limbs. It might even be a permanent cure for certain chronic illnesses. I didn't want to make any guarantees, but the research was promising. That would be convenient timing, said Conan. Deidara and Sasori will return soon, and Deidara requires healing. I nodded, curious about what sort of injury someone like Deidara could have sustained. I'd never met him in person, but it was pretty rare for an S-rank ninja to require medical care. Well, I'm not ready for human trials yet, I admitted. Theory can only take me so far. Orochimaru wasn't interested in healing other people, so there's a lot of conjecture at this point. I've done limited animal testing, and I've seen some amazing results. All the research I've read and done so far supports it, but, well. I shrugged. I wouldn't know until I tried. Nagato frowned. I would like you to continue to the next stage as soon as possible, he said. I was sure he would. Nagato was well aware of the fact that my presence here was temporary and his illness was not. Clinical trials could take years, and Itachi's 3-year deadline was only 6 months away. Until then, Deidara's severed arms should only require a simple reattachment surgery for you. That nearly made me drop my fork. Wait, his arms were torn off? I asked, eyes wide with horror. No. No, it couldn't be. Conan frowned at me. Is there a problem? Conan asked. You've reattached severed limbs many times in the hospital. Yeah, but… what was he doing that he was injured so badly? I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. Of course. It had to be. It was the right time. But somehow I'd expected. He was injured while capturing the one-tailed Jinchuriki, said Conan, confirming my fears. I'd expected to know, like how I'd known the day Shisui would die and the day Itachi would massacre the clan. But I hadn't known. I was holed up in my lab working on my experiments. I hadn't thought anything of Conan, Pain and Itachi being busy for several days. They'd been sealing Shukaku and killing Gaara. But this was expected, right? Except. Conan had said that Deidara and Sasori would return. But Sasori was supposed to die in his fight with Chiyo and Sakura. Sakura wasn't a member of Team 7. Sure, she joined the Genin Corporation, but would a random Genin be assigned to a rescue mission with Naruto and Kakashi? No, of course not. And if Sakura wasn't there, then Kankuro and Chiyo would die from Sasori's poisons. And that was if Chiyo survived the fight with Sasori at all. If she hadn't fought alongside Sakura, if she'd attempted to kill her grandson alone, what chance would she have? And if Chiyo was dead, she couldn't revive Gaara. Gaara, the Jinchuriki, is he? I began, unable to finish the sentence as dread filled the pit of my stomach. Conan and Nagato regarded me with carefully neutral expressions. Was he a friend of yours? Nagato asked. Was. That was all the confirmation I needed. No, I said. What was I going to do? I only met him once. Gaara was meant to be a vital part of the Shinobi Alliance. We were enemies. Without him, what would happen to Suna? At the time, he was filled with anger and wanted to destroy Konoha. What would happen to the Alliance? I had to fight him, though I didn't want to. Gaara was supposed to protect so many people during the war. When the fight was over, I came to realize that he wasn't so scary. But now he was dead. He was hurting. I wasn't Sakura. All he needed was someone to listen and understand how he felt. I wasn't there to help. Then he didn't want to fight anymore. I was here with the Akatsuki. I hoped that one day he would. Gaara was dead. That he would. And it was all my fault. There was a moment of silence and Conan stared at me. I felt the warm wetness on my cheek and swept away the tears. Gyo-chan? Conan asked softly. I stood abruptly. Please excuse me, I said. I fled. No. I winced, the flatness of Itachi's rejection banishing what little hope I'd summoned. But the seal will stop the transformation if it causes extensive cellular deterioration, I reasoned, holding up the book with the seal instructions. And preliminary tests on my tissue samples have been promising. The worst case scenario still only results in localized. The worst case scenario is death, said Itachi, barely glancing at it. It is an unacceptable risk. You cannot inject Hashirama cells into your own body. Well, I could, but I wanted someone there to supervise, and I'd thought that if I framed it well, Itachi might agree. The prospect of a non-deteriorating mangyeko Sharingan should have appealed to him. Apparently not. Ani-chan, I can only slow the deterioration of your eyes, not heal them completely, I said. If I can stabilize the Hashirama cells in my own body, then I can use them to heal you. It's worth the risk. There is more at stake here than your own life, he said. I grimaced because he was right. If something happened to me, who would heal the wounded in the hospital? And Itachi still required frequent healing to keep his condition in check. However. If you're no longer useful to the Akatsuki, what will happen to me? I countered. If you want to protect me, then let me heal you. In the worst case scenario, I could always escape back to Konoha. But Itachi had nowhere to go. Even if I am no longer of use, no one in the Akatsuki will harm you, said Itachi. Leader Sama has grown very fond of you during your time here. He is not the only one. I blinked at that. What? I asked. Are you sure? I mean, he's been looking after me, but if he actually cared about me, he would. I trailed off and frowned. He would what? He couldn't exactly send me home. Not while he was under Obito's command and not with Itachi watching over me. So if he couldn't send me away, what would he do? Train me? Make me strong? Give me the knowledge and experience I would need against a much more powerful opponent? I hadn't questioned Nagato's desire to teach me. I'd been content enough that he was willing to provide the training I needed. But in hindsight, that indifference felt foolish. And now that I thought about it, was I really sure that Nagato hadn't tried to send me home? He'd sent me on a mission to heal Hatu, the brother of Gato, a man famous for betraying missing ninjas to their deaths. In fact, Hatu had already betrayed the Akatsuki once. There was no reason to give him the benefit of the doubt. As Hayden had pointed out, why not simply take the information on Orochimaru and kill him? Besides that, surely Zetsu would know that Hatu and Orochimaru were working together. Nagato had to realize that Orochimaru would know about the attack. So what if the mission wasn't about retaining a wealthy client? Or even about Orochimaru? What if the mission was a perfect cover for getting me away from AIM, away from Nagato and Itachi and Obito? Hatu would obviously tell Orochimaru about the attack, and in doing so, it would act as the perfect lure for the one person I would give anything to protect. Sasuke. If Sasuke knew that I would be there, he would stop at nothing to get me back. He would attack the Akatsuki, and if I didn't step in to save him, he would surely die. So of course I would step in. I'd save him, and in doing so, I would have to flee back to Konoha, where we would be protected by our village and our cage. Conan had even taken off the space-time suppression manacle and told me to run away if things become dangerous. Nagato could then blame Itachi for not keeping me in line as promised. He probably didn't think that I was worth Madara's personal attention, and even Itachi couldn't defeat an entire hidden village at once. It was almost crazy enough to work. Almost. Because Sasuke hadn't shown up to save me. I didn't think that he'd stayed away on purpose. Sasuke was a cunning fighter, but he was also nearly suicidally reckless when it came to me. Orochimaru must have realized this too and had sent him away several days before our arrival. Orochimaru had probably been hoping for a chance to capture me, but had likely abandoned that plan when he saw Conan. Not even Orochimaru would pick a fight with Pain, and his obvious absence from our group must have looked like a trap. Sasuke likely never even knew I was there. I never thought the day would come when I was indebted to Orochimaru of all people, but his foresight had saved both of us. But even so, it almost worked. That was the scary part. I hadn't understood Nagato's intentions at all, and I'd almost fallen into his well-meaning trap. Because I was worth Madara's attention. If I had escaped with Sasuke, Obito would absolutely hunt us down. I knew secrets he wanted to keep. And Sasuke was the weapon Obito wanted to control. How could I be so blind? I shuddered, and Itachi placed his hand on my head. This could complicate our departure, I said, looking up at him. If they want me to live, they won't let you take me to my death. Maybe that was why Conan wanted me to continue wearing the Akatsuki cloak. Was it a message? She's one of us now. Leader Sama has not strayed from his path, said Itachi. Well, he would spare you if he could, he will not allow his ambitions to be thwarted by sentimentality. Yeah, that made sense. If he'd truly changed his mind on his path to peace, he wouldn't be hunting Jinchurikis. So he still wanted to take over the world, but he also wanted me to live. It was just his misfortune that those two goals were directly opposed to one another. If he wanted to capture the tailed beasts, he needed Obito and Itachi. And to keep Obito and Itachi, he had to let Itachi kill me. Or so he thought. There was a sad bit of irony in that the lies meant to keep me safe were the very things putting me in danger. I took a deep breath before letting it out slowly. Even so, I'm still worried about you, I said. A shinobi must use the tools he is given, he said. My eyes will last long enough for Sasuke to reclaim you. That is all that matters. So he was still planning to die by Sasuke's hand. I shouldn't be surprised. I hadn't done anything to convince him otherwise. Ani-chan, I said. You'll be alright, said Itachi. As if that was the problem. I want you to be alright, I said. Itachi looked away, a shadow of guilt passing across his face. I'm sorry, he said. He stood to go, and I kept my head down until he was gone. It was true that the experiment was reckless. However, I thought of Sasuke. He didn't have Naruto's regenerative healing abilities, and yet he would face a resurrected Madara and then a resurrected goddess. He was strong, yes, but he was still only human. Besides that, if I was able to stop Sasuke from killing Itachi, then he wouldn't even have the mangyeko Sharingan for the final battle. Without that, what hope did he have? Not much. I carefully picked up a syringe of Hashirama cells. The fate of the world was balanced on the edge of a knife, and failure meant the complete annihilation of all life on the planet. I'd failed to save Gaara, but I couldn't fail to save Sasuke and Itachi. I couldn't. I stared at the syringe of Hashirama cells and took a long, slow breath. This was for them. I took the needle in one hand and drove it into my arm. The reaction was immediate. I was aware of the pain. I was aware of only the pain. It raked jagged nails down every inch of my skin, diving deep, cutting, burning, freezing everything inside me. It cocooned my body, my mind, and my soul until all else faded into nothing. I couldn't think, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I merely existed in a state of unbearable agony that went on and on and on. I think I might have been screaming, but I couldn't hear anything beyond the roar of white noise, couldn't see beyond the white light of agony. And then there was red. Sharingan red. It pierced the blinding white, drawing me back, pulling me into the gray of numbness, and finally into the black nothingness of sleep. And, hi all. I'm back. Summer turned out even busier than I'd expected, but I've returned and am hoping to get to the end of the Akatsuki arc before I go on break again. This chapter was particularly difficult and had to go through several rewrites. It was originally supposed to include Sasori and Deidara during the reveal of Gaara's death, however their somewhat goofy personalities clashed with the tone I was aiming for, and no amount of reworking could make the scene function properly. So, I sadly had to cut it out, though now I'm planning to bring them back later for a different cameo instead. Since I don't want all that work to go completely to waste, here is a sample portion of their original scene that is now sadly not canon. "Are you the one working on these cell cultures?" Sasori asked. "Yes, they're for side project," I said, approaching the bench and moving them out of the way. Sasori was clearly working on his own concoction, mixing various vials to synthesize something over an open flame. It was producing purple fumes and it wasn't in the fume hood, so I hoped it wasn't toxic. "The tongs you just used have trace amounts of contact poison from my work," Sasori said, giving me a sideways glance before returning to his potion. "This particular poison can kill in 30 minutes. Huh? I ran a diagnostic scan and realized that, yes, there was indeed a foreign poison working through my bloodstream. Not much. It was likely stray flecks from a reaction rather than something placed deliberately, but still he hadn't mentioned it until after I'd been exposed. "Don't worry," said Sasori. "First the poison will paralyze you. Then your breathing will become labored. And finally your heart will stop. I'll be finished with this poison before the end though, and I'll administer the antidote before it kills you." Yeah, I could already see it damaging nerve endings. I had no desire to see what it would do if it reached my heart. "Thank you, Sasori-san, but that won't be necessary," I said, reaching over to plant a Hiraishin seal on the base of the flask. I filled the flask with saline solution and teleported out the offending poison before flushing the area with healing chakra. I flexed my fingers to rid them of the slight buzzing feeling of healed nerve endings. "There, all better." Sasori turned to regard me fully for the first time. "I suppose you're not completely hopeless," he conceded. "Hey, said Deidara, a spark of cruel mischief playing in his visible eye as he leaned forward, deliberately inserting himself between me and Sasori. "You look like the type of girl who can appreciate art." "What type of art?" I asked. His grin widened and he reached into his bag. He pulled out a small chunk of clay, molding it with his mouth, hands and chakra. Judging by the amount of chakra he was using, the bomb would be a tiny one, enough to do damage, but probably not lethal. After a moment of work, he produced a little bird. "Oh, it's so pretty," I said, my eyes widening. I gave him my brightest smile to hide my nerves. "Now make a cat, please. Cats are adorable." This was a lab filled with delicate equipment, life-saving medicine, and lethal poisons. I did not want to see a demonstration of his explosive art anywhere near all of it. So, it would be safest to keep him distracted with harmless requests. Deidara snorted at the inane comment and rolled his eye. Then he reshaped the bird into a cat. "Okay, now add a ribbon and a tiny tiara." To my amusement, Deidara complied. "Her name is Nico Heim," I declared, now running low on ideas for stalling. "Sure, Uchiha-chan," said Deidara, holding out the adorable little bomb with a grin. "Here. Don't you want to hold her?" "What if I squash her?" I said, raising my hands up so that he couldn't drop the cat bomb into them. "I don't want to ruin your art. You should keep it safe." Deidara scoffed, mortally offended. "Art isn't meant to be kept," he said. "Bastard, art is eternal," said Sasori from behind him. "Art is in the moment," Deidara disagreed. "No, what do you think, Uchiha-chan?" "Ah, both." I said, not particularly wanting to get caught in an argument between bombs and poison. It's like when I play my shamisen. The music can be written down and passed through generations, but every time a musician plays, the music is a tiny bit different. So, it can be eternal and a momentary experience all at once." "You're a musician?" Sasori asked. "I suppose there is something of art in that." "No way, Deidara disagreed. His mischievous look returned. Suddenly the clay cat leaped from his hand, growing to full size as it bounced a safe distance away. Art is an explosion. Boom. And that was the sad end of Nico Heim. It was also the end of my spectrometer, which had been reduced to a smoldering pile of rubble. Deidara smirked, but his fun was cut short by the arrival of Conan, who swept into the room in a flurry of paper. "What," she said flatly, "is going on here?" "I was demonstrating my art to Uchiha-chan," said Deidara with a self-satisfied grin. Conan turned slowly to stare at the smoking debris in one corner of the lab before she turned to me. I gave her a helpless look. "I'm going to need a new spectrometer," I said. Chapter 33. Cells. I was floating in a void, down, down, down. I was so tired. I ached. I drifted in and out of dreams. Sometimes I thought I heard voices or felt chakra brushing against me. A few times it was inside me, lighting up my veins like fireflies dancing over water with Itachi smiling at me from the dark, dark, dark. I hissed in a breath, gasping and jolting awake. I was no longer in the lab. Instead I was in a strange bower made of thick interlaced roots that formed the walls, floor, and even the bed on which I was lying. There was an opening on one wall that showed a vast expanse of grey rectangles seemingly stretching on to the horizon. Oh no. I tried to sit up, but when I lifted my arms, the motion was suddenly aborted. I blinked to clear my vision. My arm was white, not the paleness I'd gotten from over 2.5 years without direct sunlight, but rather a pure snowy white. And around my wrist was a root wrapped tightly like a chain. But not just any root. It was clearly made from wood release, much like the rest of the bower, and it was suppressing my chakra. Restraints were common in shinobi hospitals. Patients were often extremely dangerous to themselves, the medics, and the other patients. Mix in drugs, injuries, and vulnerability, and it became common sense to restrain individuals. But these weren't soft bindings designed to prevent fevered thrashing. These were the type of bindings used for prisoners. So, you're finally awake. A sharp stab of fear sliced through my heart at the deep cold voice. I turned my head to see Toby sitting half in shadow. But that wasn't his normal Toby voice or mannerisms. D2-chan? I asked, wincing at the raspy crack of my voice. I coughed. Toby's chakra fluttered briefly before settling. He stood slowly and reached out for a pitcher of water on a small table. With one smooth motion, he poured a glass of water and then carefully lifted my head to press the cup against my lips. I drank, and he allowed me to finish before settling me back against the pillows. What happened? I asked, my voice a little clearer as he loomed over me. How long had he been waiting for me? I tried again to rise, but my muscles refused to obey, and I slumped back onto the pillows. Toby only hummed, his irritation clear in the wordless sound. That's what I want to know, he said, his chakra crackling with anger. I found you near death. You were screaming with a lethal dose of Hashirama cells infecting your entire body. So, Kyo-chan, enlighten me as to what exactly happened. He was angry. Are you really 2-chan? I asked, desperately hoping that he would revert back to his Toby persona. It was only a mask, but that thin veneer of harmlessness was infinitely better than this. And I needed to stall. To think. Why had he brought me to the kamui dimension? What was he planning? I needed information. I needed him to talk. Toby hesitated, and his chakra seemed to calm a bit. Perhaps it is about time we had a proper introduction, he said at length. He reached up and unhooked the orange mask, lowering it slowly to reveal the Sharingan in his right eye. I am a living, breathing Uchiha, just like you. My name is Uchiha Madara. He was trading one lie for another. You can't be, I whispered, the barest attempt at an objection. Madara helped to found Konoha. He died years ago. It seems you're already familiar with my history, he said, replacing the mask. I can assure you that I am very much alive. I've been moving in the shadows for quite some time to further my own ambitions. It was I who created the Akatsuki. Another lie. Yahiko had created the Akatsuki. But I thought Pain-sama, I said. Keep talking. Pain is the face of the Akatsuki, he said. But I am the true leader of this organization. I was the one who allowed Itachi to bring you here. In exchange for your safety, you became a tool to keep one of my prize pieces in line. Until now you fulfilled your purpose admirably. But in light of recent events, it seems I must make certain realities clear to you. He leaned forward, and I shrank back, unable to move far due to the binding roots and my own paralyzing exhaustion. You are alive because I have chosen to allow it, he said, his voice low. You are alive because I have found use in your presence. You are alive because it suits my whim. And now. Obito reached out, and I flinched back in alarm. I grasped for my chakra, but it was sealed. I had to get away. I needed anyone, but there was no one here. No one except 2-chan. I shouted. Obito's hand froze. It stayed there for a moment before he withdrew, stepping back a pace and folding his arms across his chest. There is no need for such theatrics, he said, his voice suddenly soft as he leaned against the bower wall. The pose was deliberately non-threatening, giving me as much space as possible. What use are you to me if you are dead? I stared, wide-eyed and terrified. What? Why would he suddenly back down? And then it clicked. Even if I am no longer of use, no one in the Akatsuki will harm you, said Itachi. Leader Sama has grown very fond of you during your time here. He is not the only one. No one in the Akatsuki will harm you. He is not the only one. 2-chan. Oh. I never did understand why Obito had wanted me to call him 2-chan. Obito's only desire was to enter an infinite Tsukiyomi dream so that he could be with Rin forever. Or rather, that's what it should have been. Obito didn't have children. But maybe he wanted them. With Rin. And then I came along. A healer like his lost love and an Uchiha in a child's body. It sounded insane, but the more I thought back on it, the clearer it seemed. He'd given me clothes. He'd told Zetsu to protect me from Konin's wrath during our first meeting. He'd invited me to open on a clear night mere weeks after I'd told Itachi that I'd missed seeing the stars. He'd wanted me to call him 2-chan and hadn't objected at all when I switched it to 2-chan. In fact, it went far beyond that. Now that I thought about it, that title seemed to have a significant effect on his actions. When I'd first seen his Sharingan under the fireworks, he'd momentarily discarded his Toby persona. But instead of following through with the revelation, he'd fled after I'd called him Tu-chan. Even here in this place, when I'd called him Tu-chan after waking, he'd given me water for my cough. Then, when I'd asked him if he really was Tu-chan, he'd momentarily relented from his anger and had introduced himself, or rather this new Madara persona. And now, when my terror made me call out to him, he'd backed away to calm me down. Suddenly his anger made even more sense. It wasn't just because my death would remove his power over Itachi and Sasuke. His was the anger of a father whose child had nearly died due to their own negligence. I looked down and clutched at the blankets, my mind whirling as I tried to grasp this new revelation. It complicated things. First, because it meant that Obito was even more emotionally unstable than I'd thought, and second, because I had no idea what he intended to do to me because of it. I needed more information. And I needed to get it in a way that didn't make him lash out at me. My best chance was to play along. And I already had plenty of practice pretending to be a child. If Obito was Fugaku, what would I have said? I bowed my head. I'm sorry, I said, the trembling of my words not entirely manufactured. I wanted to help, but I did something foolish and I ended up hurting myself instead. I didn't mean to. Please don't be mad Tu-chan. There was a sharpened spike in Obito's chakra, almost like an aborted jutsu. I flinched. Was I being too obvious? Something foolish. He echoed quietly. Do you have any idea what would have happened if I hadn't been there to save you? Do you understand what is happening to you even now? I glanced down at my pure white arms. I wanted to run a diagnostic jutsu, but the tree root was still draining my chakra. When I looked back at him, Obito removed one of his gloves and held up his right hand. It was a pure snowy white just like mine. You are not the first to experiment with powers not your own, he said. Though you are by far the most reckless. I was able to use a certain material to stabilize your body and compel it to accept the Hashirama cells. Ah, of course. Madara had used white Zetsu material augmented by Hashirama cells on Obito, and Obito seemed like the kind of person to study the modifications to his own body. He'd had decades to work out the finer points and limitations. Which made my mad dash to inject myself with the cells seem even more foolhardy. Your body is still adapting to the changes, and your medical skills are useless against the regenerative power of the cells, he said. Until you are stable, this tree will keep you alive. Any attempt to remove your bindings will result in a slow, agonizing death. I trust you understand. I nodded. Good, he said. And in case you're considering escaping with your Hiraishin, you should know that we're presently in the kamui dimension, an alternate plane created by my mangyeko Sharingan. The only way in or out is through me. So rest now. I will return to check on you later. When you are healed, we can discuss how you will continue to be of use to me. Obito lifted one hand and a seal and vanished in a swirl of displaced air. I wasn't quite sure how long I spent in the kamui dimension. With my chakra suppressed, I had no mental or physical energy, so I slept more often than not. Time passed in brief fragments of shallow waking between dreams. I was usually alone when I woke, but sometimes Obito was there watching me. Obito didn't speak much, but he did tell me a few things from time to time, like the fact that I no longer needed to eat or drink thanks to the Hashirama cells. I could if I wanted to, but the cells would provide all the nutrients I needed to live from now on. I tried to use Obito's more talkative moments to better understand his mental state. Obito never explicitly addressed the fact that he thought of me as his daughter, but there were a few telling moments, such as when he referred to Itachi as my cousin, rather than my brother. Or the fact that he would bring me small presents and toys more appropriate for a small child than a teenager. His generosity prompted a bit of experimentation on my part. I determined that although Obito really did soften quite a bit when I called him Tu-chan, there were limits to what he would provide. I could always request small, inconsequential things that a child might ask for, like candies or fruit, and I could be reasonably certain that he would provide them. Sometimes he would wake me to deliver them, and sometimes he would simply leave them on the bedside table. Other things weren't quite as certain. Obito was unwilling to tell me anything regarding the outside world, including what was happening with the Akatsuki, my brothers, or the Jinchuriki. I pushed this a bit harder than common sense should have allowed, but this was something I was willing to risk his wrath for. Thankfully, he never seemed to hold it against me. In fact, as the days passed, he seemed to grow more at ease, which emboldened me enough to broach a subject I'd been thinking about for quite a while. Tu-chan, there is something I wanted to ask you, I said hesitantly. Go on, said Obito. Well, Ani-chan is strong, really strong, I said. But I don't think he wasn't strong enough to kill everyone in the clan. Not by himself. Were you, did you? I trailed off, not quite able to form the words. Did I help Itachi in the slaughter of our clan? Obito finished. I nodded. Yes. I knew the answer. I'd expected it. But the unfeeling admission still felt so wrong somehow. Why? I asked, the words small and quiet. Because they were in my way, he said. I blanched, but had I really expected anything else? The mangyeko Sharingan was incredibly powerful, and there were several users within the clan. If Obito wanted to take over the world, he would need to make sure they couldn't stand against him. And for that I looked away. Do you really hate us that much? I asked. I should probably stop. But I had to know. The Uchiha were so close-knit, it was hard to imagine that Obito hadn't had a single friend or loved one in the entire clan. Had there really been no one that he wanted to save? What I felt is irrelevant, he said. I have found a use for you and your brothers. Your life and their strength will bring about a new era of peace in this broken world. No, we wouldn't. At least, not in the way he was imagining. You still doubt me, said Obito, and I winced. Oh, well, I mumbled. I wasn't about to challenge Obito on his philosophy. This was Obito after all. But my misgivings were obvious enough. I don't see how causing more pain and suffering will make things better. I have spent many years traveling this world, said Obito. I sought answers for why we suffer, and everywhere I looked I found only darkness. Whatever suffering I create is nothing compared to the atrocities committed by others. We are merely a means to an end, a method by which the darkness will one day be swept away. But that logic, he could justify anything. His goal was a dream world where all of his terrible actions had simply never happened. It's true that there is darkness in this world, I admitted. I could hardly claim otherwise. There was a time when I thought that the whole world was empty and black. But when I couldn't find the light, I didn't give up. I became the light for someone precious to me. I think that we could lessen the suffering in this world by being the light we want to find. And what evil has been vanquished by your light? Obito asked. The only reason you are alive right now is because of those who walk in darkness. I couldn't argue against that. Zabuza and Haku had been defeated by brute force. The same was true for Gaara. And without Itachi's timely rescue, I would likely have disappeared into Orochimaru's lab. I was alive because I had the good fortune of being surrounded by powerful individuals who deigned to protect me. On my own, I would have died a long time ago. The world is broken, and it's not meant for people like me who don't want to fight, I agreed. I owe my life to all the people who stood up for me when I needed them. And because of that, I want to mend their wounds and soothe their pain. And I want to help others too, because everyone needs help sometimes, and I want to be there for others the way that others have been there for me. I might not be able to do much, but I can do that at least. It won't change the world, but it might make the world we have a little bit better. I am not interested in a world that is a little bit better, said Obito. When my dream becomes a reality there will be no wounds to mend and no pain to soothe. Everyone will have all that they desire. And what do you desire? I asked. Obito was silent for a long moment. By aiding me, you will play a part in saving this world, he said. That is all you need to know. Some time later, Obito returned. He reached over and carefully probed my arm. Small amounts of chakra danced across my skin in a basic diagnostic jutsu. When he pulled away, it was with a sound of satisfaction. It seems the changes have solidified, he said. This is no longer necessary. He ran his hand over the roots that had held me in place since my arrival here. They shuddered, loosening their hold on my arms and I collapsed bonelessly into Obito's grasp as he held me up. Breathe, he said. It's only your chakra. I took a few deep gasping breaths. Obito did not release me immediately and I clutched at his arm for support. It was chakra alright. But it was foreign, alien, like oil running through my veins. And it was immense, bubbling and flowing like a vast river beneath my skin, where once there had been a small spring. I mentally poked and prodded it as Obito held me fast. It responded to my touch and call. I tentatively shaped the chakra into a diagnostic jutsu. The transformation had taken place on a cellular level. I was still recognizably me, but the Hashirama cells had infected every part of my body. They'd settled down now and weren't doing any damage, at least none I could identify. In fact, they were regenerating even small injuries like the microscopic muscle tears. You've never had access to your full chakra before, have you? Obito asked. He let me go and stepped back. What do you mean? I asked. You've always been a sickly child, said Obito. You cycled healing chakra through your body day and night for years just to stay healthy. With the Hashirama cells performing the healing, your natural reserves have had time to reach their full capacity. The cells, too, offer some of Hashirama's legendary strength. Your chakra capacity currently exceeds even that of pain. Now I have a job for you. Come with me. He held out his hand. I didn't really want to take it, but if this was the only way out. I laid my hand in his, and in a swirl of air, we were suddenly back in the main Akatsuki base. Itachi was waiting on a nearby examination table with one forearm braced against his knee. It might have been a relaxed pose, but for his unnatural stillness and the way his gaze snapped to mine the moment I entered. His expression, too, was unreadable. "Ani-chan," I said, unable to hide my sudden relief. Of course he needed his regular healing. "I want a prognosis for his eyes," said Obito. "Oh, okay." I stood at the head of the examination table and brought the diagnostic chakra to my hands before I held them up to Itachi's closed eyes. My brow furrowed. "Ani-chan. What is the prognosis?" Obito asked. "There is extensive damage to his ocular cells," I said carefully. Extensive damage didn't quite cover it. He was very nearly blind, likely only able to distinguish movement, color, and general shapes. This was the deterioration brought on by the mangyeko Sharingan. I couldn't fix this. No one could fix this. "Are you able to restore his sight?" Obito asked. I hesitated. "It will take some time," I hedged. "I see," said Obito. "Very well. Take whatever time you need and inform me when he is once again mission ready." Obito raised a hand to form a seal and vanished. I stood frozen in silence for a long moment, my hands resting lightly over Itachi's closed eyelids. I could feel the way his chakra flowed. He felt calm, as though he actually thought I could do something about this. Itachi reached up to touch my face. "Are you well, Kyu-chan?" he asked, for once not bothering to use a genjutsu. Though at this point it probably didn't matter much. Obito knew. I laid my hand over Itachi's. How was I going to tell him? Obito wanted Itachi's strength. If Itachi was suddenly crippled. There was only one course of action, really. "I need to prepare you for surgery," I said, my voice strangely calm. It shouldn't have been, really. At best this was a patch job. It would have to be enough. Itachi's eyebrows furrowed, barely a twitch under my touch. I stepped back and took one of the medical seals from the shelf. It would keep him sedated and stabilized while I worked. I didn't have the luxury of a second one, but that was fine. I would make it work. "What is the procedure?" he asked. Fair question. I'd always healed him with chakra alone when he'd come to me before. This was rather unusual. "Transplant," I said, placing the seal on the exam table. Before I could lower him onto the seal, he was standing. "Unacceptable," he said. I tried to push him back down, but he brushed me aside. "I require the Sharingan." "You'll still have the Sharingan," I said. Itachi was clever. He understood immediately. "No," he said. The word fell like a stone, unyielding in its finality. "It's the only way," I countered. He had to understand. There were limits to miracles. I don't need eyes to be useful to them. But he did. Without his eyes, he was no longer an S-rank threat. He was still powerful, of course, but not powerful enough to belong to the Akatsuki. Itachi was staring me down with ink-dark eyes. From this angle, I could see the faint white sheen that blanketed his vision. "Do you understand what you're offering?" he asked, calm and level. I opened my mouth to say yes, but his eyes, clouded as they were, stared hard into mine. And so I took a moment to consider it, to truly imagine what a life of blindness would mean. Even if I transplanted his eyes into mine, my vision would not be adequate to read or write. I would no longer be able to look up references or read new medical texts and would have to rely on memory for any obscure medical facts. I could continue to heal using my chakra sense, as my healing procedures rarely required sight, but I would be limited in my ability to diagnose problems at a glance the way I usually could. And there were other things as well. Starlight and fireflies would be all but lost to me. I would never see Sasuke's or Itachi's faces ever again. Even so. "It's the only way," I repeated. And wasn't that the sad truth? All my time studying medicine and healing the sick, and this was all I could do. This was it. "Then there is nothing more to discuss," he said, turning to the door. "I will speak with Madara." The bottom dropped out of my stomach. "It will only be for a short while," I shouted. Itachi stopped, and my brain finally caught up with the words I'd spoken. As if they made any sense at all. Unless. "My body is made of Hashirama cells now," I said, the words spilling out, tumbling over one another in my haste to explain, pretending like I'd planned this from the beginning and wasn't just making it up on the spot. "They regenerate injuries, and I've theorized that they can regrow limbs and cure chronic issues like blindness. It's in Orochimaru's notes and I've observed similar behavior in my own tests. If I take your eyes and transplant them into me, I think I know I can heal them. When the process is complete, I can transplant them back." The Uchiha clan had extensive texts and documentation on eye transplants for obvious reasons. The Konoha hospital had taken their notes and turned it into a standard part of the curriculum. A talented medic could perform a transplant in minutes. I had done it a half dozen times already. "The process cannot be done without a transplant?" Itachi asked, still wary. I couldn't blame him. Without the Mangekyou Sharingan, he would be at a serious disadvantage against Pain and Obito. Parting with it, even for a short time, would be disconcerting. I opened my mouth to say no, but I paused. If I inject you with Hashirama cells, the effect will be the same, I said slowly. But, after certain events, that's probably not advisable. I gestured to myself before remembering the pointlessness of the motion. I cleared my throat to cover up the momentary pause. And I don't think Madara-sama would allow it anyway. No kidding. Even the thought of asking made my stomach clench. He might not have injured me, but an angry Obito was not something to take lightly. How long would it take and what is the success rate? He asked. I don't know, I admitted. But it's the only way and it will work. Medics weren't supposed to make promises. Certainly not for experimental procedures with no real data backing up the claims. But Itachi had to agree and I would say what I needed to say to make it happen. Besides, Obito used his Mangekyou Sharingan all the time and it had shown no signs of deterioration. It was most likely due to his Hashirama cells. Probably. I hope so, anyway. Itachi nodded, slow and thoughtful. I see, he said, and I smothered an inappropriate smile at the irony of that phrase. If you believe that this is the best path forward, I will agree to the surgery. My heart leaped. But you will consult with Madara before doing anything. And my heart dropped straight back down again. But I could understand his reasoning. Obito was angry because I'd been reckless. Apparently I hadn't learned a single thing from my solitary confinement either. He would probably be just as angry if I went through with the surgery without consulting him first. He would probably still be angry. But what was the alternative? He needed Itachi's strength. His response was a foregone conclusion. And if you are unable to heal my eyes, you will still return them to me regardless, he added. I winced. Itachi really could see right through me. If the procedure wasn't successful, I hadn't been planning to take my eyes back. He really did need them more than me, but I could also understand why he wouldn't want to keep them. Alright, I agreed, attempting to inject a note of confidence I didn't feel. Let's see what Madara-sama says. Intellectually, I was prepared for the concept of blindness. But the reality was both nerve-wracking and frustrating. Obito hadn't been particularly happy about my proposal, but he admitted that it had merit. Obito had been kind enough to let me perform a diagnostic jutsu on him, which gave me a clearer understanding of how the cells interacted with a Mangekyou Sharingan. I took what information I could and mentally filed it away before performing the transplant. Alright, Ani-chan, how is it? I asked. I couldn't see because of the thick bandages wrapped around my eyes. Well, they were really Itachi's eyes transplanted into my head. Itachi had my eyes. His eyes were so badly deteriorated that I didn't want to risk using them at all. It was better to stay in total darkness until I could get an idea of how much work I had to do. Adequate, he said, sitting up. I could feel his chakra and the slight stirring of air as he shifted, but that was it. He moved with ninja silence. I'll know how long it should take within a few days, I said, touching the bandages. I would estimate between 2 weeks and a month. Impressive, said Obito. If you are done here, I will return you to the Bower. She will stay with me, said Itachi. I stilled at the spike of intent. There was a long silence between them. I couldn't see what they were doing. Their chakras were raised but otherwise still, not shaped into a jutsu or prepared for an attack. I wanted to fidget as the very air filled with the heavy silence of intent. Very well, said Obito at last, though the tension did not lessen. She will be confined to your room until she has finished healing your eyes, at which time you will return to active duty and she will return to me. There was a beat of silence and no further objections. Obito's chakra flared, but he merely departed into kamui. I waited a beat longer to be sure that he was gone before I let out a shaky breath and slid off the stool. It was disorienting to stand without any visual cues and I wobbled, reaching blindly. Itachi caught my hand to steady me. Can you walk? He asked, quiet and soft, so unlike his normally blank tone. Yes, Ani-chan, I said. He gave my hand a squeeze and guided me back to our room. He helped me sit on the bed, removed my shoes, and helped me change into a nightdress. His attentiveness made me wonder how difficult it must have been for him with his own deteriorating eyesight. He didn't exactly have the luxury of someone looking after him. Ani-chan, there's something I want to ask of you, I said with only a hint of trepidation. Itachi made a sound to indicate that he was listening. A lot of bad things might be coming soon. If something bad happens to me, if I die, will you bring my body back to Konoha? Back to the clan grounds? It was a stupid, selfish, pointless thing to ask. What did it matter what happened to me after I was dead? The dead didn't care. But still, the thought of winding up in an unmarked grave in some strange foreign place made me feel inexplicably sad. It was a fate shared by many ninja. You will not die, said Itachi. Promise me anyway? I asked. Itachi sighed. I will ensure that you are returned to Konoha, he said. I promise. My sense of relief was immediate. Thank you, Ani-chan, I said. One way or another, I was going home. I lay down on my bed, but to my surprise, Itachi scooped me up and placed me on his bed instead, tucking me under the sheets before laying on top. This wasn't particularly unusual. Whenever he was here and I had nightmares, I always crawled into bed with him. He never objected, merely holding me until I fell asleep. This time, however, he wrapped his arms around me a shade too tight, and it occurred to me that perhaps this embrace wasn't entirely for my sake. I wondered what it must have been like for him. How had he learned of what had happened? Had Obito told him, or had he simply returned one day to find that I was gone? Did he think that I'd died and that Obito was covering it up? That thought led to a sinking realization. Itachi's eyesight should not have deteriorated this quickly. I'd been monitoring him carefully and had been administering regular healings to keep it under control. Had he intentionally destroyed his own eyes, forcing Obito to release me so that I could treat him? That he hurt himself just to know that I was still safe. Itachi's clinging grip had not loosened, still too stiff and desperate to be soothing. I wiggled one of my arms free and reached up to touch his face. It's okay, Ani-chan, I said. It wasn't. Nothing about this situation was okay. But I had to say it anyway. Itachi leaned into my touch before finally relaxing his grip and allowing me to settle into a more comfortable position. For the first time, it was me who held him until he fell asleep. Chapter 34. Farewell. I began healing Itachi's eyes delicately, mindful of the danger presented by the Hashirama cells. Because the cells had been grown in the Jito statue with white Zetsu material, they were effectively progenitor chakra molded into physical form. That alone was enough to complicate things, but there was another issue as well. It was common for transplants to contain host chakra for several days post-op, but Itachi's chakra never really faded from his eyes, even after weeks of separation. His chakra mixed with mine and shored up the cells in a bizarre and fascinating blend of energy. I theorized that this was how the eternal mangyeko Sharingan was created. Of course, because I did not have a mangyeko Sharingan of my own, his eyes could not complete the transformation. The clashing of Hashirama's chakra with mine and the mangyeko Sharingan made for slow progress. Still, after 2 weeks, I was almost ready to return Itachi's eyes. I was just completing the final touches of healing when I received a summons from Zetsu. He informed me that pain was waiting for me and that I would be expected to return to my daily seal healings. So I went alone to the tower still blindfolded, able to tread the path with practiced familiarity. Pain-sama, Konan-sama, I greeted when I opened the door after a polite knock. This was not a conversation I was particularly looking forward to having. Konan's chakra flickered with what might have been surprise. What happened to your eyes? She asked. Well, that wasn't the response I was expecting. Oh. Because of the Hashirama cells Ani-chan has them, I said before my brain caught up with the question. Wait. If Konan had to ask, that meant that she didn't know about the transplant. And if she didn't know about the transplant, she probably didn't know about Itachi's damaged eyesight. Of course she wouldn't. Obito and Itachi wouldn't want to advertise that particular piece of information. I cursed my thoughtlessness. Itachi took your eyes because of that? Nagato asked, his tone hard. His chakra stirred in obvious anger. He's going to give them back soon, maybe tonight even, because, I mumbled, desperation from my blunder creeping into my voice as my words tumbled out. How could I explain this? I needed to change the subject. I can still perform the seal healing. I don't need my eyes for that. Yes, good. Focus on the reason they brought me here. Nagato's chakra crackled with agitation as he stood up. Had he seen through me? Was he angry that I'd hurt myself and, in doing so, abandoned all of my other duties? What had happened to everyone who needed my daily seal healings? Was Nagato still holding up? Nagato reached up a hand and placed it on my head. I'm sorry that I pushed you to this, he said. Huh? At what point had he pushed me to do anything? But I suppose that Nagato was the one who had requested that I move to the next stage of testing as soon as possible. Did he think my foolish recklessness was his fault? I shook my head. I messed up, I said. I'm so sorry. Nagato let out a small sigh. I forgive you, he said. Come. Breakfast is getting cold. He took my hand and guided me back to the table where I found that my chair was still present despite my extended absence. Konan helped to fill my plate. I only picked at my food, gamely trying for a reasonable portion. But since I no longer needed to eat, soon enough I pushed my plate aside. Only for Nagato to push it back. 3 more bites, he said, shamelessly throwing my own advice back at my face. You need food to regain your strength. I'm okay, Pain-sama, I said. And, yeah, so I was as white as a ghost, and maybe I'd lost a bit of weight, but I wasn't sick. Eat anyway, said Nagato. Well, there was no arguing with that tone of voice. I took 3 more bites. Perhaps it is time to move you into the tower, said Conan suddenly. Some sunlight may help return a bit of color to your skin. I winced. Well, this is a side effect of the Hashirama cells, so probably not, I said, holding up my too pale hand. But it's not dangerous. In fact, now I'm in better health than ever. The Hashirama cells guaranteed it. Still, once Itachi returns your eyes, I'm sure you'll be more comfortable up here, said Conan. It's long past time that you had a room of your own. Conan, said Nagato gently. Then perhaps we should go shopping together, Conan continued. Your clothes are quite worn by now, and with Oben approaching, it would be nice to have a new summer yukata. Conan, Nagato repeated, more forcefully this time. Something silent passed between them that I couldn't see behind my blindfold, but I was more distracted by my own thoughts anyway. Oben was approaching. How long had I been in the kamui dimension? If Oben was almost here, then the 3-year time frame Itachi had initially given Sasuke was running out. My plan had always been to wait until Sasuke defeated Orochimaru, then use the Hiraishin to jump to his side, explain everything, and finally return to Itachi. Once Sasuke knew the truth, the 3 of us would be able to fight Obito together and return to Konoha. Well, maybe. That last part was a little fuzzy and possibly hopelessly naive, but we'd figure something out. We'd be together again, after all. Of course, Itachi would be upset at me for acting on my own and ruining his planned death, but he'd just have to live with that, since I wasn't going to let him die. But if the deadline was almost here and Sasuke hadn't left hidden sound, did that mean that something went wrong? But if it had, Itachi wouldn't be hanging around AIM. He'd be out there rescuing Sasuke, right? Right. Sasuke was fine. I just needed to be patient a little while longer. It's okay, Konan-sama, I said quietly. I don't need anything. There was a beat of silence. Is there no part of you that wishes to fight back? Conan asked, sounding tired. Don't you want to go home? Are you truly still resigned to your fate? She'd asked me that before, up in the mountains in snow country. So they really had been training me all this time in the hope that I would rebel against my own death. But I couldn't. It wasn't time for my escape. Not yet. I needed them to give up on me. At least until I received word about Sasuke. Oni-chan promised to return my body to Konoha, I said. I'm going to be with my clan again. I trailed off before taking a deep breath and giving Nagato and Conan my best smile. I am going home, back to where I belong. So please don't worry about me. Lies were easiest when they skated on the edge of truth. There was a long silence. I wanted to undo my blindfold so that I could see their expressions, but after telling them that Itachi had my eyes, I couldn't risk them seeing that I had his. So I simply waited, trying to project as much positive intent as I could until Conan spoke again. You once told me that it was not a betrayal of your pain and your loss to look back and remember a time when you were happy, she said. But the same is true for accepting your loss and moving on. My smile fell. As if it was that easy. As if I could. I'm sorry, I said, not quite sure what I was apologizing for. It's alright, said Nagato, once again pushing my plate in front of me. 3 more bites. Come sit by me, and I will brush your hair, said Itachi when I returned for lunch. I'd spent most of the morning at the hospital catching up on patients that required surgery. More than a few had been alarmed by my blindfold, but I'd done my best to reassure them. Conan had invited me to eat with her and Nagato, but I told her that I hoped Itachi would return my eyes today, so she let me go. I just needed a bit of uninterrupted time to finish the healing process, and I'd be ready to perform the transplant. Hopefully that would mollify them a bit. Alright, I said, taking a seat beside him. Carefully, I removed the origami angel hair clip and the blindfold. I blinked rapidly, squinting. The lamps in our shared room weren't particularly bright, but even dim light was too much for eyes that had only seen darkness for the last 2 weeks. After a few moments, my vision cleared, becoming almost too sharp, too real. Was this an effect of the mangyeko Sharingan? Itachi took a brush and began slowly running it through my hair. There is something I need to ask you, he said. What would you do if Sasuke chose to turn against Konoha? That was a good question actually, though not the one I'd been expecting. Years ago, I'd hoped to avoid Sasuke's defection altogether, but obviously that hadn't worked out. And once I reunited with Sasuke, I would tell him the truth about the massacre. It would be far too dangerous for Sasuke to return if he knew nothing about Danzo. I would try to stop him, I said. I'm sure you will too. Itachi was silent for a long minute as he delicately untangled a knot. I will not always be there to guide him, he said at length. There may come a time when you are the only thing standing between him and the village. Nai-chan is stronger than me, I said. He always had been. But I will do whatever I can to stop him. If he attacks the village, he will spend the rest of his life being hunted down. I don't want that for him. Life as a missing ninja was hard. There was a reason the Akatsuki stayed together despite their differences, and it wasn't entirely because of pain. Itachi swept the brush through my hair several more times. "What if the only way to stop him was for you to kill him?" Itachi asked. "No matter what happens, he's still my Nai-chan," I said. "I would find a way to bring him home. I won't kill him. Not ever." "I couldn't." Itachi set down the brush and gathered my hair, clipping it into place with Conan's paper angel. "I know," he said, brushing his fingertips over my faded blue ribbon. "When will you be ready to return my eyes?" "Whenever you are," I said. "I finished the last of the healing while we were talking." "Then let us begin now." The transplant was completed without issue, and within moments, Itachi was blinking at me with his own eyes once more. I too was once again in possession of my own eyes, a fact that was oddly reassuring. It wasn't that Itachi's eyes were uncomfortable, but I was still glad that mine were back where they belonged. However, a tight knot of foreign chakra remained. "On each hand, what did you do to my eyes?" I asked. Of course it wouldn't be something bad, but it was still somewhat alarming that he hadn't seen fit to mention it to me first. "I've given you a portion of my power," he said. "It may serve you when you need it most." Right. Itachi could implant things like amaterasu into people's eyes with a simple forehead poke, so of course having access to my eyes for weeks would make things easier. "I don't want to hurt anyone," I said. "You won't," he assured me. I bit my lip. Itachi's abilities were almost exclusively offensive. I mentally prodded at the chakra. There was something strange about it. It contained Itachi's chakra, but there was also another chakra signature nestled in there too. It was familiar in a distant sort of way, a half-remembered someone from long ago. I tried to recall when I'd felt it before. It felt like messy black hair, a playful grin, a teasing voice. And I knew. My heart ached. I touched my right eyelid, feeling the power that lay hidden there, power that had once been entrusted to Itachi and now to me. Kodomatsu Kami. I strummed the final notes on my shamisen as I completed my evening ritual. In the final moments before I closed the seal, I sent out one last wave of positive intent, my goodnight to the people of AIM. "Tomorrow we will resume your training," said Nagato. Like I'd hoped, he'd seemed relieved to see my eyes once more. "You will need time to become accustomed to your new body." "Yes, Pain-sama," I said dutifully. I'd spent most of the afternoon practicing kata, but nothing quite compared to actual training. I also wanted to test out my new chakra capacity and stamina. Not to mention the possibility of learning wood release. It was a combination of water and earth, two elemental transformations that I'd never even tried to harness. I wasn't sure when Itachi was intending to leave again, but I was hoping to do a bit of genjutsu training with him. He would obviously have copied some water techniques from Kisame. And I was sure he'd have a few earth techniques to show me too. Nagato might know some as well. I wanted to get as much training in as possible. Surely I'd hear something about Sasuke's situation soon. I frowned. "Is something wrong?" Nagato asked. "Ah, no," I said, shaking my head. Although it might not hurt to ask. Actually, I was wondering if. Nagato's chakra suddenly sharpened and he turned abruptly to face the opening in the wall. "What's wrong, Pain?" Conan asked. "Someone has disturbed my rain's fall," he said. "And judging from their chakra, it's someone dangerous." The diva path emerged from the balcony. "I'm going to stop the rain, Conan," said Nagato. "Use your jutsu to find the intruder." "Leave it to me," she said. "Get ready," said Pain, forming the seals. He stood in the rain and raised his hands, withdrawing his immense chakra from the clouds. Within moments, the pitter-patter of raindrops had ceased. "Go, Conan." "Right," she said, dissolving into paper and dispersing into the air as thousands of origami butterflies. The diva path retreated to the back room, only to be replaced by the animal path a few moments later. Meanwhile, Nagato remained seated at the table with a distant expression. Then his frown deepened. "Pain-sama?" I asked. "Is something wrong?" "No," he said, still distant and distracted. "Our intruder is someone I once knew." How nostalgic. Someone he. My eyes widened. Jiraiya. It had to be. And this was his fight with Pain, the one where he'd be killed. I had to what? My mind raced as I looked at Nagato. He was right there, perfectly distracted. I could disrupt his chakra enough to sever his connection with the Pain bodies for about 3 seconds before he pushed me away and re-established the connection. That wasn't long enough. I could fight him. Nagato would obviously have to prioritize protecting his real body over dealing with Jiraiya, but I didn't think I could bring myself to effectively stab Nagato in the back. Not after everything he'd done for me. And I would have to kill him if I wanted Jiraiya to have any chance of escape. Unless. If I could touch Jiraiya for even a moment, I could Hiraishin him back to the safety of Konoha. Nagato would be furious at the betrayal, but it was almost time for me to leave anyway. This was my chance. If Sasuke was still in hidden sound, then I'd just have to help him escape. A loud series of explosions echoed through aim. I turned in time to see billowing clouds of debris from a nearby building. Pain's chakra burned like an inferno within, and I could almost make out Jiraiya's much smaller chakra as well. I hadn't realized they were so close. I had to get away from Nagato. I could easily jump to one of the Horatian seals I'd planted on the paths of pain, but if I didn't time it properly, I wouldn't be close enough to Jiraiya to save him, and that assumed that Jiraiya was willing to let me touch him in the first place. Depending on what he knew about my time here, he might even consider me an enemy. May I head down to the hospital? I asked. If the fight keeps going like this, people will be hurt and I want to be there to help. Nagato glanced at me before waving me away. Very well, he said, probably more to get rid of me than out of any real concern for hypothetical injured bystanders. Do not leave the base. I nodded, slinging my shamisen across my back and hurrying out of the room before he could think better of it. I focused on the chakra signatures I could feel. There were now 3 paths of pain fighting Jiraiya, while Conan hung back at a safe distance. They were close, only a few blocks away, right at the edge of a vast lake. By the time I reached the hospital, all 6 paths of pain were moving. I strained my senses. Jiraiya's chakra was erratic with agony. Had he been injured? Time was running out. If I was going to do something, it had to be now. But even as I prepared to make the leap, Jiraiya and one of the paths of pain vanished. My whole body stilled. Was it over? Had I missed my chance? Was Jiraiya really? Without thinking, I sprinted out the door and down the street. I was moving with chakra-enhanced speed to the place where I'd last felt Jiraiya's chakra. To the place where I still felt 5 of the 6 paths of pain. I had to know. I came to a skidding halt on a ledge overlooking the shattered remnants of a battlefield. The 5 remaining paths of pain were spread out, obviously searching. What are you doing here? The diva path asked. I told you to remain in the base. I had to, I said, frantically sweeping the area for any sign of Jiraiya. But he wasn't here. Had he escaped? Return immediately, said the diva path. There. Jiraiya's chakra appeared beneath the water. Pain didn't seem to notice, at least not until Jiraiya popped up. Then all of them were moving. 4 above, 1 below. I had no time to think, no time to consider. My Sharingan activated and I shined in front of the diva path using one of the marks I'd placed on his arm. There were 5 metal spikes, each aimed at a vital point. I only had a moment to react. How could I manage to deflect them all? My eyes widened, trying to see. There was a flash of red and my eyes burned, just like they did back in the land of waves when I gained my second Tomo. And suddenly it was as if pain was moving in slow motion. Not only that, but the rods were in 2 places at once. No, that wasn't it at all. I could see where the rods were, and I could see where they were going to be, like peeking a moment into the future. I could see it. I could see it all. Everything I needed to save him. I used my shamisen to push aside the diva path's rod and slipped beneath the others. I didn't even feel them as they pierced my body, but I was able to use the extra fraction of a moment to shift enough that none of the remaining 4 hit any of Jiraiya's vital organs when they passed through me and continued into him. I screamed as pain used the rods to disrupt my chakra. I might not have felt the rods initially, but I could certainly feel them now. Pain cut his chakra, allowing me to numb the agony once more. I placed one hand on Jiraiya's back and poured healing chakra into him. I couldn't send him away in this condition. He'd die in moments. I had to stabilize him first. Pain-sama, please stop, I gasped, choking on my own blood. One of his rods had pierced my lung. This is Jiraiya-sama, your sensei. You don't want to kill him. I looked up at Pain to see his eyes narrowed. I hold no more love for my former sensei, he said, cold and unfeeling. This is the judgment of God. He raised the rod in his hand to strike. I was pinned down and couldn't move to stop him. I needed more time. Jiraiya-sama looked after you. I cried. He protected you. He trained you. He cared about you. If anyone will listen to your ideals, it's him. You want to bring peace to this world, right? There won't be any peace if you kill everyone. Please, Pain-sama. Please stop. I staunched the bleeding and isolated the puncture wounds with a bandage-like layer of chakra. Just a little bit more. Whatever bond we shared is now gone, said Pain. He is a mere mortal, a child, standing in the way of God. Anyone who stands in my way will meet the full force of my wrath. Pain angled the rod so that it would strike Jiraiya's neck without piercing me. Pinned down, I couldn't move to protect him. We were out of time. As Pain thrust the spike downward, I shined Jiraiya back to Konoha's hospital. The spike embedded harmlessly in the stone beside my face as I slumped down, still pinned by the rods. I'm sorry, Pain-sama, I choked again, even as I cycled healing chakra to mend the worst of my injuries. I needed to heal before I shined to Sasuke. I could only imagine what he would think if he saw me like this. No one should have to kill their sensei. Do you even realize what you have done? He asked. Pain's normally stoic face was a cloud of anger. Pain, said Conan. That was enough for Pain to look up. I tracked his gaze to the nearby dock. Itachi and Kisame stood watching us. Even from this distance, I could see Itachi's Sharingan burn. Oh, this was bad. This was really, really bad. I'm sorry, Pain-sama, I repeated, loud enough for Itachi to hear. It would help if he understood the situation. I'm sorry I betrayed you and helped Jiraiya-sama escape. Please forgive me. As if forgiveness was even a possibility. To a ninja, betraying your leader was treason. In most hidden villages it came with an instant order of execution. There were no trials or appeals here, just the cold retribution of those in power. 4 of the Pains reached down and pulled the metal rods from my body. I let out a gasp of agony. Heal yourself, he said. I was already doing so, knitting together the puncture wounds and draining the blood from my lungs. Just a few more moments, and I would be ready. Itachi and Kisame used body flicker to appear on the water beside the stone. Leader-sama, said Itachi, his voice utterly empty. Allow me to administer the punishment for this transgression. What exactly did you have in mind? Pain asked. Betrayal is not tolerated within this organization. Itachi looked down at me as I finished healing my wounds. He nodded to Kisame, who hefted Samahata and placed it on my back, instantly absorbing all of my chakra and thwarting any chance of escape. The time has come to fulfill my ambitions, he said as he turned back to Pain. If you wish it, I will make her suffer before the end. Wait. If it was time, did that mean that Sasuke had killed Orochimaru? And Itachi hadn't told me? No, of course he hadn't. When had Itachi ever told me anything if there was a chance that it would put me in danger? He must have realized my plans, and so he'd kept me in the dark until it was too late. I tried to move, to escape from Samahata's gnawing hunger, but Kisame dug the living blade into my back, pinning me down and crushing the breath from my lungs. That will not be necessary, said Pain before turning back to me. Kyo-chan, now that Itachi has come to take your life and the lives of your precious brother and friend, do you finally feel hatred for me? What a strange question to ask. What did it matter how I felt about him? I was powerless and he saw himself as a god. But still, after 3 years together, I owed him a response. Even if Obito and Itachi were the ultimate architects behind my time here, Pain and Conan were the ones who looked after me from day to day. They were the ones who had given me a hospital, who had trained me, who had helped me to grow in more ways than one. I owed them so much. I don't hate you, I murmured. Thank you for looking after me for these last 3 years. Ah, right. They were looking after me. Even now. I had to stop them, prevent them from following me. I reached up to unclasp Conan's origami angel and laid it at Pain's feet. I was briefly devastated at the loss of my ribbon, but my vision was already swimming from lack of chakra and I didn't have the coordination to untie it. Getting rid of the tracking device took priority. I guess this is goodbye for the last time, I whispered. Pain was lost in darkness, but Naruto would help him find his way before the end. Pain was silent for a long moment. I see, he said. Pain said Conan, and there was a strange crack in her voice, like she was wounded. Had Jiraiya managed to hurt her? Maybe I could still heal her before I tried to lift my head, but even that movement was too much. It is time for us to depart, said Itachi. And what would you do if I refused to let you take her? Pain asked in a low not quite threat. I blinked, slow and weary. Why? Why would he want to keep me here? Even if he did feel some affection for me, I was nothing but a liability now. I'd betrayed him. If anything, he should want Itachi to kill me right here. She is necessary for the fulfillment of my ambition, said Itachi with bland detachment. Pain's chakra swelled and Itachi's flared as he activated his mangyeko Sharingan. Now this looks like it could be interesting, said Kisame, bleeding off killing intent. Around us all, Conan's paper swirled. Oh no. If this turned into a fight, I didn't even have enough chakra to get out of the way. I tried again to move, but my fingers wouldn't even twitch. My vision had been reduced to a narrow tunnel. Yo. Interjected a familiar, bubbly voice that only served to make my heart stop. Toby appeared beside Pain. Oh, hey, what you all up to? Ooh, is that Kyo-chan? What are you doing out of the tower? Wow, you look really beat up, huh? There was the barest hint of mockery to his tone, almost imperceptible unless someone was listening for it. And there was something more. Something angry. Toby, said Pain. This does not concern you. I was pretty sure that it did. Eek, said Toby, jumping back in apparent fright. What a scary expression. Hey, you're not fighting, are you? The warning was clear. Pain and Conan could probably win against Itachi and Kisame. Maybe. But against Obito, Itachi and Kisame they had few paths to victory. Fewer still with aim to protect. If Pain chose to fight, he would lose. And for what? The life of someone who had just betrayed him. Very well, said Pain as the whole world slipped away. Ensure that she does not suffer. I closed my eyes as rain began to fall. Compared to world peace, what was one life worth? Nothing. It was worth nothing. And then I was gone. Chapter 35. Different Perspectives 2. Kabuto. Exactly which one are you? Kabuto asked. Sasuke turned, catching Kabuto in a Sharingan Genjutsu, showing him Orochimaru's transference ritual. Showing him Orochimaru's defeat. I have absorbed him completely, said Sasuke, the normally stoic Uchiha displaying a rare moment of genuine satisfaction. This was bad. Kabuto didn't dare move. Even the slightest hint of aggression would mean certain death. But Sasuke simply turned away, proceeding down the hall and making his way out of the base. What now? With Orochimaru dead, Kabuto was. A swirl of icy air swept through the hall. Kabuto-san. Kabuto turned slowly, coming to face the unusually beautiful and feminine young man. When Haku had first arrived in Hidden Sound, Kabuto was certain that he wouldn't last long. The soft-hearted ones rarely did. Personally, he'd had higher hopes for Karen, who had quickly adapted to life here. But although it took some time, Haku had grown to become just as cold and cruel as Kamimuro. And even more lethal. Haku clasped his hands and bowed deeply. I wish to express my appreciation for you, Kabuto-san, he said, rising from his bow and giving Kabuto a small smile. It was a lifeless, empty thing. Because of you, I was able to surpass my limits and become a proper tool able to fulfill Sasuke-sama's will. Of course, said Kabuto, keeping his tone neutral. Haku was a strange one even by Hidden Sound standards. As far as Kabuto could tell, Haku held no desire beyond obeying Sasuke's orders. So, if he was here, then, what use does Sasuke-kun have for me? Haku's placid smile remained frozen in place like an angelic mask. You're irrelevant to Sasuke-sama's ambitions, he said. That is why he has given me permission to repay you for all that you've done. Oh. Kabuto fell into a taijutsu stance, bringing chakra to his hands and forming a twin set of chakra scalpels. He was at a disadvantage in close quarters combat, but he had little choice. The confined space would limit Haku's speed and maneuverability, but… Kabuto cried out in pain. The chakra scalpels flickered and vanished as the blood vessels in his hands burst, ice forming in his veins as his hands froze solid in seconds. When heady. The icy breeze. Haku was able to infuse his chakra into microscopic ice crystals. They were small enough to be carried on the wind and could painlessly piece any exposed flesh on a victim, giving Haku the ability to crystallize the water in their blood. Kabuto stumbled back, bringing up his healing chakra to mitigate the damage as the ice slowly began to spread. But it could not be contained. Even as he cut off circulation to his lower arms, spots of crystallization began appearing on his neck and calves. You were always so fascinated by my jutsu, said Haku. Please enjoy this first-hand experience. I've kept the progress low so that you can fully appreciate the extent of my feelings. After all, it was you who proposed this jutsu in the first place. Kabuto attempted to flee, numbing his pain receptors. If he could increase the distance beyond Haku's effective range, then he might be able to repair the damage. Kabuto performed a body flicker. Only for his frozen leg to shatter, breaking off at the knee. It was you who gave me all of those prisoners to interrogate, said Haku, approaching Kabuto with deliberate measured steps. Kabuto raised his frozen hands in a last-ditch effort to defend himself, but his shoulders locked into place as the ice spread down his torso, deftly avoiding anything vital, prolonging his life for a few extra moments of agony. Haku reached down to touch Kabuto's face gently. And it was you who prevented me from rescuing Kiyosama on the bridge, he whispered as ice spread from his fingertips, freezing Kabuto's eyes. The last thing he saw before the world became a blur of white was Haku's cold, empty smile. So please accept my deep and heartfelt gift. As the frozen crystals clawed past Kabuto's eyes and into his brain, he realized belatedly that Haku's smile wasn't empty at all. It was filled with ice. Conan. Pain please, said Conan, her quiet desperation nearly lost in the cheerful pitter-patter of rain across the water. Madara, Itachi, Kisame, and Kyo-chan were gone, vanished into Madara's kamui dimension, leaving Pain and Conan alone in the rain. There is nothing to be done, said Pain, his monotone belying nothing of his true feelings, unlike his chakra which roiled in anger and grief. This was always our destined path. The path to true peace. Conan took a hesitant step forward, toward the stone still slick with the mingled blood of their small companion and their former mentor. The rain was already washing it away, staining the water pink and diluting the blood sacrifice throughout the vast lake until no evidence remained that it had been offered at all. Conan knelt to scoop up the ribbon-bound angel and held it in both hands. No matter what choice he makes, my ribbon is precious to me, she said. I want to keep it for as long as I live. She has accepted her fate, said Pain, his tone just a little bit softer. And so must we. Or everything that we have sacrificed will have been for nothing. Conan's fingers traced the well-worn ribbon. It was layered with chakra imbued from years of love and use. But the lingering chakra would not last forever. Soon it would fade and the last traces of her would be gone forever. Kyo-chan, all of our friends, and Yahiko, said Conan. What is the point of creating a peaceful world if the ones we care for never live to see it? Pain was silent. You wanted to save her too, said Conan. That was why you trained her, wasn't it? So that she might become strong enough to escape. Of course I wanted to save her, said Pain. If there was a path that would allow her to survive and for the world to find peace, I would take it without hesitation. But to act against Madara directly would mean risking everything. I am the only one strong enough to bring peace to this world. I am the only one with the will to bring us to the bright future we've always dreamed of. I am the only one. He trailed off. I cannot sacrifice the entire world simply because I came to care for one doomed child. You're God, said Conan. But she is an angel of God. Pain sighed. It was a heavy sound. We cannot save someone who will not save herself, said Pain. It was true and they both knew it. If Kyo-chan had chosen to escape back to Konoha, Conan was certain that Pain would not have followed her. He wouldn't attack her village. Conan doubted that he would even kill her friend, the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. But Kyo-chan hadn't escaped. She'd stayed for reasons that Conan couldn't understand. And so she'd gone to meet her death. Conan brought the angel to her chest, holding it close. I cannot give up now, Pain continued. Not when I am so close. And what about Jiraiya-sensei? Conan asked. She knew that he stood in the way of true peace, but still, it made her heart glad that her former teacher was still alive out there somewhere. His life was Kyo-chan's final gift to them. She'd never once stood against them for her own sake, but she'd also never hesitated to help another person in need. Perhaps that was their mistake. If they had simply told Kyo-chan that her escape would save her village and protect her friend, then perhaps that would have been enough for Kyo-chan to stand against her elder brother. But they hadn't. The risk of Madara discovering the truth and turning against them was too great. So they'd tried to manipulate and trick her into doing what they wanted. And that was what led them to where they stood now. I will finish what I began with him, said Pain. She begged us to stop, said Conan. She only asked us to speak to him and to listen. He was our sensei. There is a chance that he might understand. He will not listen, Pain sighed. Those who preach compassion and understanding are always the first to fall. And I cannot fall. I will continue on the path to peace even if I must go alone. The unspoken question hung between them. Conan held no delusions about their situation. About Madara. I am still an angel of God, she said, opening the front of her Akatsuki cloak and placing the paper angel safely into an inside pocket. I will bring peace, said Pain softly, almost as if he was trying to reassure himself as well as her. Then there will be no more sacrifices. Conan did not respond, instead tilting her head back so that the rain trailed down her face like the tears she could no longer shed. Madara. Damn it, why aren't we allowed to go after Sasuke, Madara asked. He and Sasori were high above the forest, riding on one of Madara's clay birds as they sped towards their next target. Orders from Leader Sama, said Sasori, answering as if Madara hadn't been in the meeting too. Bastard. Chan, it's because of Uchiha-chan, isn't it? Madara guessed. She's gone now. I didn't even get a chance to play with her. Her brother never appreciated my art. Giving her a taste would have shown him, Going after Itachi directly was pointless considering the difference in their strength, a fact that Madara was loath to admit even to himself. But Itachi obviously wanted the girl alive for something, and if that was the case, Madara would have liked to use her when demonstrating the potency of his art. It would have been easy, too. Healers weren't known for their battle prowess, and she likely felt safe while in the Akatsuki base. Sure, Itachi and Pain might be irritated at her death, but it wasn't like Kakuzu hadn't murdered half a dozen previous partners already. They'd get over it and then Itachi would have to admit Madara's superiority. He'd almost had his chance, too. After getting both of his arms ripped off during the capture of the One-Tails vessel, Madara had been looking forward to meeting the little healer. But by the time he'd returned to aim for treatment, she'd been unavailable, whatever that meant. Kakuzu had been recalled instead, stitching together Madara's arms and adding some questionable human flesh to replace one of his missing elbows. That's why you never had the chance, said Sasori. It's your own fault. I was looking forward to meeting her too. I heard she uses a shamisen to heal. There is something of art in that. Madara scoffed. Art? He said, wrinkling his nose. Art isn't strumming on the strings of an instrument. Art is an explosion. There was a beat of silence. Bastard, art is eternal, said Sasori, rehashing the same old argument they always had. Madara respected Sasori, but on this point, he would not concede. Though the knowledge that Uchiha-chan played an instrument did make Tadara curious about her own thoughts on art. Music was, by definition, almost as ephemeral as an explosion. Perhaps she might have been the one to break their stalemate on the nature of art. Well, it was too late anyway. She was already gone, taken by Itachi. Her opinions, whatever they might have been, didn't matter now, if they ever did. Anyway, if we can't go after Sasuke, there's still the Konoha ninjas, said Tadara thoughtfully, flexing his mended arms. I still owe them for our last fight. Don't get overconfident, said Sasori, nodding toward the small lake where Zetsu had indicated that the Konoha ninjas were waiting. That's the spot. Tadara grinned. Let's show these uncultured brats the true meaning of art, Naruto. Hut the crap. Naruto snarled, clenching his fists as Kyuubi's chakra began bleeding into his own. Kyo-chan would never help people like you. The blonde Akatsuki member smirked from his vantage point high above the clearing. Naruto wanted to rush at him and wipe that stupid grin right off of his smug little face, but their last encounter was still a vivid scar across his memory. He chased after the man to retrieve Gaara's body, and though he'd succeeded, it was only with the help of Kakashi-sensei. If he tried to rush the other man, it wouldn't end well for him. Some distance away, Yamato, Sai, Sakura and teammate were dealing with a weird puppet guy, the same one who had murdered Granny Chiyo. Behind Naruto, Kakashi stood analyzing the situation. Privately, Naruto was glad that it was just him and Kakashi against the weird blonde artist. Tsunade Bachan had assigned Yamato, Sai and Sakura to help him after his failed mission to rescue Gaara. Naruto had objected. Loudly. He didn't need replacements for his team, not when he was so close to getting them back. But Bachan hadn't been interested in his arguments. According to her, if he wanted to get his team back, he needed allies. And so Naruto had reluctantly joined them. Sakura was okay, he guessed. She was Bachan's student and she'd even been nice to him a few times at the academy. But she wasn't Kyo-chan. Then there was Sai, who was an even bigger bastard than Sasuke. And Yamato, well, he was just weird. And creepy. Naruto would just be glad when the real Team 7 was back together again. But right now, there was someone standing in his way. Believe what you want, but she's been one of ours since she came to the Akatsuki, Tadara taunted. You bastard. Naruto snarled, but he couldn't refute the man's claim. No one had known what to think when the pervy sage had appeared in Konoha's hospital half dead and missing an arm. His explanation on waking up had only confused Naruto further. Kyo-chan was wearing an Akatsuki cloak. She'd begged Pain to spare the pervy sage. She'd used the Hiraishin to help him escape. But if she was free, why hadn't she just come home? Shikamaru had proposed various theories from mind control to seals, but nothing fit. If she was truly imprisoned, she wouldn't have been able to Hiraishin the pervy sage to safety, but if she was a willing member of the Akatsuki, she wouldn't have bothered to save him in the first place. So something else had to be keeping her there. Naruto didn't want to think too hard on what those reasons might have been. Shikamaru's suggestions of mind-crippling torture or threats against her loved ones just made Naruto want to scream and rip something apart. Worse, Sai had brought up the possibility of branding her as a missing ninja. If she really was an enemy of Konoha, she'd have to be treated as one, he'd reasoned. Naruto had grabbed Sai's shirt, but Kakashi had stepped in to stop him before he could do anything permanent. Kakashi assured Naruto that Kyo-chan wouldn't face judgment until they knew more about her situation, though even the possibility of her condemnation was enough to make Naruto's chakra burn with rage. Naruto hadn't wanted anything to do with Sai after that, but his last encounter with the artist duo had proven that he couldn't do this alone. And that's where they were now. Still tracking down the Akatsuki. Still trying to find Kyo-chan and that Itachi guy. Or at least she was a member of the Akatsuki, Tadara continued with a vicious grin. But then she went and betrayed Leader Sama by helping one of you Konoha ninjas escape. For that, she was sentenced to death. Itachi took her away 3 nights ago. If she's not dead already, she will be soon. Naruto's eyes widened. No. It couldn't be. You're lying. He shouted. 2 shadow clones popped into existence and Naruto began shaping his Rasen Shuriken. It didn't matter that Bachan had warned him against using it. It didn't matter that using this technique would hurt him. It didn't matter because if Kyo-chan was really dead, then. Naruto, calm down, said Kakashi, grabbing Naruto's wrist and startling him into releasing the half-form technique. What? But Kakashi-sensei, Naruto protested. How could he possibly be calm at a time like this? If Kyo is still alive, we'll need to get to her quickly, Kakashi continued, talking over him. We can't afford to waste time on these two. We have to get to her location. And to do that. Naruto grit his teeth and turned back to the blonde Akatsuki member. Yeah, I get it, he said, suppressing Kyuubi's chakra with a concentrated effort. He needed to make sure that Tadara didn't escape this time. He still had to pay for what he'd done to Gaara. We have to deal with this guy first. It didn't matter what this guy had to say anyway. Kyo-chan was alive. She had to be. And when they found her, she'd be able to explain everything. Then with Kyo-chan back, the bastard would return too. And then they'd all go home together. Everything would go back to the way it was before. Naruto was sure of it. Kisame. You know, it's strange to say this considering everything you've done, said Kisame, the barest trace of amusement in his tone. But that look in your eyes, it's almost like you still care about her. It was a strange thing to say, especially since Itachi was currently using chakra suppression chains to bind his unconscious little sister to an altar in the derelict temple where they now stood. She looked so tiny against the massive stone slab. Her ghostly pale skin and the dried blood from Pain's attack made her look like a sacrifice. A fitting image for the youngest Uchiha given the history of their family. I want to fight Sasuke one-on-one, said Itachi, ignoring Kisame's comment as he finished his work with the chains. They were currently some distance away from the old Uchiha hideout where Itachi planned to stage his final battle. Do me a favor and keep everyone else out of it. According to Toby, Sasuke was traveling with two vassals of the Uchiha clan, an ice wielder descended from the Yuki clan and an Uzumaki censor. Toby was off somewhere, having vanished shortly after dropping them off. Kisame doubted that they would make much of a difference in a fight, but it might be interesting if they decided to entertain him. Fair enough, but still, said Kisame, his voice still light, still amused. It's a little sad parting with you like this after all we've been through together. And they would be parting. Kisame had long since learned to see beyond Itachi's illusions, and not only those born of his genjutsu. Of course Kisame had noticed the gentle care Itachi always used with his little sister and the softness in his eyes when he looked at her. It was never anything significant, nothing that an untrained eye would see. But it was there nonetheless. It had been there right from the start, from their encounter while trying to capture the Kyuubi's vessel. Itachi could have killed her then. He should have killed her then if he really was trying to traumatize Sasuke into gaining the mangyeko Sharingan. But he hadn't. Instead he'd put her under a genjutsu and had carried her in his arms all the way back to Aim, scarcely parting from her for even a moment and constantly checking on her while she slept. And the girl's actions in the Akatsuki base had also cemented the fact that Itachi's feelings were not one-sided. Right from the start, she'd been at ease around Itachi in a way that was blatantly impossible given their supposed history together. Kisame had been quite curious about the story behind that, but he hadn't pressed the issue. And he certainly hadn't brought his observations to the attention of anyone else in the organization. Whatever existed between the two Uchiha siblings was a secret, and to Kisame, secrets were meant to be kept. But whatever secrets they held, one thing was clear. Itachi had no intention of letting his little sister die. And Kisame suspected that the same was true for Sasuke. So Itachi intended to lose his battle. And for people like them, a lost battle only ended in one way. Kisame was no stranger to the concept of comrades dying. He'd killed most of his allies at some point or another, never once hesitating in carrying out his orders. And yet, when Itachi stepped away from the sleeping girl and regarded her for a long moment, Kisame felt something akin to regret. He joined the Akatsuki because he'd been lost while wandering through life, not truly understanding his own desires or purpose. He couldn't say that he'd found either in the organization, but with Itachi, he did find something that almost felt like belonging. If Itachi had ever chosen to leave the Akatsuki, Kisame would have followed him without question. He certainly had little enough loyalty to Pain and no interest at all in some twisted ideal of peace. Itachi departed, confident in Kisame's ability to fulfill his task. Kisame lingered for a moment longer before leaving the sleeping girl behind and heading off to intercept Itachi's younger brother. With Itachi gone, would Kisame return to his wandering? The Akatsuki was slowly falling apart with the deaths of Haiden, Kakuzu, Sasori, Deidara, and soon Itachi. They'd lost members before, but never so many in such a short period of time. Or perhaps he'd hang around for a little while longer. He had no siblings of his own, and it might be interesting to see if he could come to understand why these ones were worth dying for. Sasuke. You've grown stronger, said the mass of crows that was once Itachi. They scattered, and Itachi's voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. She is in the central chamber. Make use of her life before you come find me. This is your last chance. Sasuke stiffened, his eyes immediately going to the far door that led deeper into the temple. He passed through the antechamber with deliberate measured steps, keenly aware of his surroundings and the possibility of a trap. But all attempts at caution vanished the moment he entered the central chamber and saw Kyo-chan bound to an altar. He closed the distance between them in a moment, unsheathing his blade and slashing through the chains. They fell with a clatter, but Kyo-chan remained unresponsive, her eyes closed and her chest rising and falling in the slow rhythm of a deep sleep. Sasuke resheathed his blade and reached out to touch her face. It was just as Haku had said. She looked exactly the same. Well, mostly. Her skin was deathly pale. Sasuke wasn't sure what could have caused it, but he suspected that Itachi had kept her locked away in some dark windowless cell for the past 3 years. That alone made his heart clench, but more worrying was the large quantity of dried blood soaked into her clothes and the obvious puncture wounds in the fabric which lined up to the stains. What had Itachi done to her? Sasuke examined her quickly, but there were no signs of injury. Obviously she'd healed herself, which would explain her apparent youth as well, as that was a side effect of her constant healing. But if she'd had chakra to heal, why hadn't she escaped? Why hadn't she returned to him? If that was really her on the bridge to Wave, then she was clearly allowed to move around with some semblance of freedom. So why? It had to be because she couldn't. Sasuke wasn't sure why or how, but something had prevented her escape. And judging by the paleness of her skin and the blood-soaked rag she wore, he thought he might have understood. Sasuke's jaw clenched. Threats, torture, and a terrifying, sunless prison. Only allowed brief moments of freedom to do Itachi's bidding. He'd probably told her that he would target Sasuke if she escaped. So she'd stayed there, enduring whatever horrors Itachi inflicted on her and waiting for the day that Sasuke grew strong enough to save her. All to protect him. Sasuke hoped that she would forgive him for not finding her sooner. He'd spent the past 3 years training every single day with the singular goal of rescuing her and killing that man. But that would be a cold comfort to someone who had waited day after day for a savior that never came. "I'm here now," Sasuke whispered, brushing her fringe from her closed eyes and tucking a lock of hair behind her ear. Her ribbon was gone, he noticed. He considered waking her and offering her the ribbon he'd meant to give her all those years ago. But he couldn't. If she woke now, she'd surely Hiraishin the both of them back to Konoha, and he still had business to resolve with Itachi. Besides, she looked so peaceful as she slept. He hoped that she was dreaming sweet dreams of sunlight and home. He did not want her to wake to a world that still contained the man who had imprisoned and tortured her. No. When she woke, she would be free of him. Forever. Sasuke hoped that that would be enough to earn her forgiveness for his failures as an older brother. "I'll be back soon," he murmured, stepping away from his sleeping sister and returning through the entrance hall. She would be safe here. When it was done, when it was over, he would return. He would take her somewhere safe. He would give her the ribbon and nothing would ever take her away from him again. But to do that, there was something else he had to do first. Kill Itachi. Itachi. Everything was proceeding as well as expected. Sasuke had grown so much in these past 3 years. He was easily on par with an average S-rank missing nin like Sasori or Deidara, which was about the limit of his potential without the mangyeko Sharingan. However, despite his vast improvements, he was still far below the level of power required to kill Itachi. Perhaps things would have been different if Kyo-chan had not healed him, but as it was, Itachi hunched over and gasped while clutching at one eye, feigning a level of weakness he did not feel. Even after allowing Sasuke a few hits that he could technically have avoided, and even after liberal use of his mangyeko Sharingan for no real benefit, Itachi could still have won handily if he'd wanted to. Of course he didn't want to. So now he had to drain away the last of his power and allow Sasuke to deal the finishing blow. Everything else was already in place. He'd explained the nature of the mangyeko Sharingan to Sasuke within Tsukiyomi and had relayed the information about Madara. He'd witnessed Sasuke's ultimate move and was suitably impressed by Kirin's power. He'd also removed Orochimaru from Sasuke's body with a Totsuka blade, finally freeing his younger brother from the snake forever. All that was left was to implant amaterasu into Sasuke's eye, one final trap for Madara. He'd already ensured Kyo-chan's safety, and with this final act, he would ensure Sasuke's safety as well. "Eyes," Itachi muttered, shuffling forward after dispelling Susanoo and his Sharingan, giving the impression of waning strength. Sasuke stumbled back, clearly out of chakra. Itachi faltered, inviting Sasuke to attack. "Come, little brother. Even a simple kunai would do." But instead of attacking directly, Sasuke reached for the small medical pouch at his side, one identical to Kyo-chan's. He pulled out a small bottle. Soldier pills. Yes. Kyo-chan had given Itachi plenty over the years. Of course she would have done the same for Sasuke. Itachi's lips curled into the barest of smiles. She had never once sought retribution for what he had done to her. It was only fitting that she should provide Sasuke the strength needed to kill him. But his atonement would be complete. Sasuke bit down on the pill, and one final Chidori burst to life within his palm. Chidori was a close-range attack, giving Itachi ample opportunity to grant Sasuke his final gift before death. Itachi reached up shakily with one hand. The timing needed to be right. Sasuke lunged forward with a scream, thrusting his arm out, aiming straight at Itachi's heart. But just as Itachi braced for the attack, Sasuke's forward momentum was abruptly halted, his attack never reaching its intended target. Because it found another instead. The tiny body of a little girl that had appeared between them. Chapter 36. Reunions and Revelations. The Kodo knelt in front of me. Seeing her after so long, something welled up in my chest, an unnamed overwhelming emotion. "Kyo-chan," she said, reaching out for me, surrounded by light. "You're alright now." This was it. "Ah-chan," I began, reaching out for her too. After all this time I was finally. But before I could touch her, something pulled me back. She vanished along with a world of light. I gasped, blinking and breathing in dust and ash. There was debris scattered around my feet and the smell of blood in the air. I reached up to clutch at the hole in my chest, but it was gone as if it had never existed at all. What? How? I thought back, struggling to understand. After waking, I'd immediately hear I shined to the mark I'd placed on Itachi's hand 3 years ago. I'd barely had time to register the situation. Sasuke's eyes were Sharingan red and burning with hatred. Itachi was hunched over and bleeding, his eyes black and his posture inviting Sasuke's Chidori. I'd had only a split moment to decide. Move and allow Itachi to be killed or. It hadn't hurt when Sasuke's hand pierced my chest. Our eyes met for one brief moment, his widening with horror and understanding before mine went dark. And then. I looked back toward Itachi, who had raised his left hand to cover his eye. Only when he lowered it did he reveal the milky whiteness beneath. Oh. Izanagi. He'd sacrificed his left eye to save me. To bring me back. "Ani-chan," I said. But before I could say more, Itachi pitched forward, injured and the last of his chakra spent to revive me. I caught him before he hit the ground, softening his fall. Behind me, Sasuke took a step forward. "Nai-chan," I said urgently, shielding Itachi as well as I could. But that turned out to be unnecessary as Sasuke stood staring at me with his two wide Sharingan red eyes. No wait. They weren't just red. They were red and black in an intricate pattern of the mangyeko Sharingan. Sasuke took another halting step forward, still staring at me. "You were dead," he said, his voice raspy. He reached out a hand. "I killed you." "I'm okay," I said. I had to stop him. "Ani-chan saved me. Nai-chan, I have to tell you." But before I could explain anything, Sasuke too fell forward, his own chakra exhaustion finally catching up to him. I barely managed to break his fall. I knelt, holding Sasuke's head as the sky opened up and it began to rain. I sat there for a long moment simply existing. But no matter what I felt right now, we couldn't stay. There were things I needed to do. First things first. I had to make sure that they would both survive. I ran a quick diagnostic jutsu over Itachi because he seemed the worse off between the two. He had several deep lacerations, multiple stab wounds, and second-degree burns on his arms. Nothing serious. I cycled healing chakra through him, quickly sealing the wounds and reverting the burned skin. There was nothing I could do for his blinded eye, however. My heart clenched at the thought of what my actions had cost him, but I couldn't dwell on it now. I'd have to ask for forgiveness later. Next was Sasuke, who was, as expected, in better condition. He had a few minor burns as well as some small scrapes, but it was only the work of a few minutes to get him back to full health. Now all they needed was rest and some shelter from the rain. I weighed my options. Going back to Konoha with a chakra-exhausted Itachi was a bad idea. Aim was equally terrible because of Sasuke. Unfortunately, I had precious few alternatives. "So, Kyo-chan, you really did manage to save him." I was on my feet in an instant. I hadn't felt his arrival, but there he was standing over Sasuke. "Obito." "Now too," he began with a glint of red from the eye of his mask. But before he could move, my right eye burned as Itachi's chakra mixed with mine, solidifying into a technique. My vision went red as I clamped a hand over my eye. But it was too late. The pain and chakra faded, leaving behind a dull weight. What was that? What command had Itachi hidden in Shisui's eye? "Don't be frightened," said Obito, spreading his arms as though to show his harmless intentions. As if Obito needed a weapon to be dangerous. "I'm here to talk." Obito looked down at Sasuke in an unspoken threat. "And you will listen." This wasn't good. Itachi and Sasuke were completely helpless. Obito didn't want Sasuke dead. I knew this. The same wasn't necessarily true for Itachi, though. So if I wanted to protect him, I'd have to make Obito back down. That was easier said than done. Kamui wasn't something that could be dealt with easily. But the fourth Hokage had managed to get the better of Obito with a Hiraishin. Of course that was a much younger and far less experienced Obito. He would obviously be wise to that trick. I had to think of something else. What do you want?" I asked, stalling for time. My only chance was to bind him with my chakra chains. Then he wouldn't be able to use Kamui at all. Only then would he be vulnerable. Of course, as soon as I formed the chains, he'd turn intangible, and then they'd be useless. I had to forge the chains and attack without his notice. But how? Well, the Sharingan could see chakra, but it didn't have the ability to see through things at the same level as a byakugan. I could use that. "My dream has always been to bring true peace to this world," said Obito, taking a step forward. And for that, I require your brother." He nodded towards Sasuke, still unconscious. "He won't help you," I said with confidence I didn't feel. Sasuke's anger was his weakness. It made him easy to manipulate and control. "I think he can be persuaded with the right motivation," said Obito with a meaningful look at me. I fell into a taijutsu stance and then brought chakra to my feet, shaping the chakra chains from my soles and pushing them into the cracked ground so that they could snake slowly toward Obito's position without his notice. "I won't help you either," I said. "I think you will," said Obito. "Because you are correct. Without proper incentive, your brothers will not join me willingly. And if you are unwilling to provide that incentive, they become dangerous liabilities." A long spike of wood descended from his sleeve, stopping just above Sasuke's throat. "Do you understand?" How could I not? Right now Itachi and Sasuke were his biggest potential assets and threats. If he could use me to control them, then they became unrivaled allies. If he couldn't, well, Itachi was practically a force of nature and Sasuke's potential went far beyond that. Of course Obito wanted them. And that was exactly why I couldn't allow him to have them. My chains burst from the cracks in the stone, wrapping around Obito's legs and slipping straight through him. Damn it. I'd lost the element of surprise if I'd ever had it at all. Instead of trying fruitlessly to ensnare Obito, my chains continued past him, encircling Sasuke to form a barrier shield. Obito regarded the new obstacle with curiosity, so I ran lightning through my chains as well, causing Obito to leap back. I did the same for Itachi, guarding both of my brothers from any potential attack. Of course, protecting them also served to pin me down, since attempting the Hiraishin would break any connection I had to the chains. If I tried to move anywhere, I'd have to take them with me. Should I use the Hiraishin to escape with my brothers? Maybe if I could get to Naruto and explain the situation. No. With Obito's plans for Sasuke, he would absolutely pursue me to get to him. Running to Naruto would only serve to drag him into danger too. Besides, my strongest attack was one that worked best when I didn't have to worry about collateral damage. The only problem was getting it to land. "Such a disobedient child," said Obito. "Perhaps I've been too lenient with you." I raised my hands to form a clone seal, and 5 shadow clones popped into existence beside me. 2 went to stand beside Itachi and Sasuke, 1 went to gather some of the fallen kunai scattered around the ruins, and the last 2 blitzed forward in a standard pincer attack. The best strategy against Kamui was to strike when he went for a counter-attack, so I'd have to aim for that. The first shadow clone attacked with basic taijutsu, not bothering to waste chakra on something that would never land. As expected, the clone passed right through Obito, who turned and burst the clone with a single strike. The other clone was suddenly on top of him, having used a mix of body flicker and lightning to enhance its speed to incredible levels, but it too missed Obito by a fraction of a second, and Obito managed to burst it after it passed through him as well. Passed. Though the clones hadn't managed to strike him directly, they had covertly planted various Hiraishin formulas on the rubble around his feet. Just in time for the third shadow clone to return with a barrage of freshly formula-marked kunai and shuriken. They passed right through Obito, naturally, but they also filled in the gaps left by the first 2 clones, cutting off any potential escape routes. Finally, the clone produced a net of chains woven with barrier seals, surrounding Obito but not touching him, caging him in. Obito considered the chains and barriers. "Do you really think that this is enough to stop me?" he asked, unconcerned. I waited, tense. I just needed him to there. The air around Obito's eye swirled as he began to teleport, but my clones were faster. The 2 that were standing over Sasuke and Itachi used the Hiraishin to leap to 2 of the marks within the barrier, right on top of Obito where they caught him in a web of chakra chains, cutting off his jutsu and forcing him back into this reality. I waited a beat, waited for Obito to break free. But he didn't. He simply stood there, watching me and not struggling. But why? "Pain certainly has been busy with you, hasn't he?" Obito asked, his tone mild. "When did you realize that I must become tangible to teleport?" What was he doing? Was he stalling? For what? "I won't let you hurt my brothers," I said. "Then you'll have to kill me," he said. "That is the only way to make me stop. But can you do it? Do you have the resolve to bring about the world of peace that you desire?" My clones tightened their grip on the chains binding Obito. As he was now, if I channeled wind and lightning chakra through them, he would certainly be killed. But could I do that? "You hold back. Tell me, have you ever fought with the intent to kill?" Nagato had tried to warn me. This was the purpose of my training. With just a little bit of chakra, I could prevent the war. I could save so many lives. If he was gone, he wouldn't be able to drag Sasuke into darkness. He wouldn't be able to hurt Itachi. All I had to do was kill him. That was all. What was one life in exchange for so many others? He wasn't innocent. My hands shook. Was this what it meant to be a ninja? To kill for the greater good even when your opponent wasn't fighting back? Even when you knew that there might be a better way? Was this how Itachi felt that night? I do have the resolve, I said. But not to kill you. Instead, I still want to seek peace and understanding. What was I doing? What was I even hoping to accomplish? Obito had sacrificed everything for his dream. He had done so much. He had hurt so many people. All to escape his own personal hell. All for the promise Madara had made that one day his suffering would end and he could be happy again. What promises could I make? I had nothing to offer but cold, immutable reality. But still, I had to try. If Naruto could reach him, then maybe I could too. If there was even a small chance, then maybe. I know that as hard as it is for me, I am not the only one who has felt the pain of loss, I said, my voice growing a little steadier. You've lost someone too, haven't you, Obito? Obito, whose posture had been relaxed and attentive, stiffened visibly. What did you call me? He asked. How long had it been since he'd used that name? Obito, I said. That's your name, isn't it? It was hard to tell at first. Your chakra is so different now. But no matter how much you've changed, you're still you. And I've felt your chakra before in Kakashi-sensei's left eye. Obito's posture eased, though there was still a tension that hadn't been there before. You can call me by that name if you want, he said. But it means nothing to me. I cast it aside a long time ago when I became Uchiha Madara. As for my pain, that too means nothing. I have no interest in this world. It does not matter to me at all. I will create a new world, one unlike this hell. But you're not Madara, I said. You're Obito. You are a ninja of Konoha. You are Kakashi-sensei's friend, the one he still mourns every single day. I know that you're hurt because of this world we live in. I hurt too. But hurting others isn't going to make things better. You can still stop what you're doing. You can come home and return to the people who still care about you. Please stop this, Obito. I told you, that name means nothing to me, he said, sounding almost gentle. There is nothing for me in Konoha or anywhere else in this forsaken world. There is only my ambition. And it doesn't matter if you have the resolve to make your world a reality. Because I do. A searing pain lanced through my chest and I choked as blood spilled from my mouth. I looked down to see a spike of wood protruding from my right lung. Something warm was against my back. I summoned a cloak of lightning, but it fizzled out before it could throw off whatever was behind me. Worse, I felt it take control of my chakra from within. My clones dispelled and my chakra chains vanished. I tried to thrash away from its grip, but the warmth spread down my arms and legs, binding me. With great effort, I managed to turn my head and look over my shoulder. Black Zetsu. There is no need to be quite so rough, said Obito, the smallest of rebukes. Her Hashirama cells will be enough to heal her, said Black Zetsu, withdrawing the wooden spike from my chest. Unless you want me to finish her off instead. No, I have something else in mind, said Obito as he suddenly appeared before me, reaching out. There was a moment of disorientation and suddenly we were back in the kamui dimension, specifically, back to the bower where I'd spent several months during my recovery. You cannot leave this place without me and you do not have the resolve to kill me, said Obito. So you will remain here until I no longer have a use for you. If you do as you are told, you will not be harmed. He turned away as if to leave, but then he paused. Oh, and one more thing. I could only watch wide-eyed as he jabbed two chakra-coated fingers into my chest, sliding between the third and fourth ribs. I gasped as a seal wrapped around my heart. Obito pulled his hand back and Black Zetsu, likewise, withdrew. I fell to my knees, already healing the puncture wounds in my chest. This cursed seal will prevent you from ending your own life, said Obito. Because you cannot be trusted to protect it yourself. It will also seal Shisui Sharingan to keep you out of trouble. I would take it for myself, but it seems that Itachi saw fit to bind it to your 8th chakra gate. Removing it would end your life, and your death would destroy it. How unfortunate. Anyway, rest now. I will return after I've resolved things with your brothers. And then Obito took Black Zetsu and vanished in a swirl of displaced space, leaving me alone in the kamui dimension. I was on my feet as soon as I felt Obito's swirl of chakra. Nai-chan. I shouted, sprinting forward and throwing my arms around him. Are you okay? Did he hurt you? Not waiting for an answer, I ran a diagnostic jutsu and cycled healing chakra through his body. He was unhurt, though still exhausted, but that didn't give me as much pause as the feel of his chakra. It was darker than before, darker than Orochimaru's curse mark. Kyo-chan, he said. His voice was strange, distant and apathetic. Only then did I notice that his arms were hanging loosely at his side. He wasn't returning my embrace. I have some questions for you. A chill ran through my blood. I hugged him tighter and pressed my face into his stomach, but he felt as hard and unyielding as stone. I'd always known this day was coming. I had to answer for everything I'd done and everything I'd failed to do. I released him slowly and took 2 steps back so that I could face him without craning my neck. He'd gotten so tall. Okay, I said. But, Nai-chan, please tell me if Ani-chan is alright. The fact that Sasuke was here and Itachi wasn't was alarming. Ani-chan. Sasuke echoed, his voice growing cold. So it's all true then? Everything Obito said about our clan. Wait, Obito. So Obito had revealed his true identity. Well, he probably had to since I knew it and I would obviously tell my brothers about him if given the chance. It wasn't like he was any less powerful just because he wasn't a real Madara. It was a guise he used to gain respect, but with me under his control, he didn't need the ruse anymore. I don't know exactly what he told you, I said. But you can't do what he says. He wants to use you to destroy Konoha. I was acutely aware of how weak that sounded, but I didn't have much to work with. I'll decide what to do once I've heard what you have to say, said Sasuke. I want to hear the story, the full story, from you. Tell me everything you know about the massacre. I don't know everything, I hedged. But I was able to piece a few things together. When we were young, the adults were unhappy and whispered about things they didn't want us kids to hear. I heard people from the village calling our family traitors. It made me think that there was something wrong between the clan and the village. Du-chan also talked about a situation between the clan and the village elders. He wanted Ani-chan to be the bridge that connected the clan to the village. And as time went on, it just seemed to get worse. Everyone was always so nervous and angry. I paused because when I put it like that, it really was nothing at all. I confronted Ani-chan and Shisui Nai-san about it the day before he died was murdered, I corrected. They told me that everything would be okay. Goodbye, Shisui Nai-san. I swallowed thickly. After all this time, it shouldn't hurt quite so much. My eyes stung. But Shisui Nai-san was killed, I said. And then Ani-chan I stopped again. I couldn't say it. I didn't want to say it. And it wasn't like Sasuke didn't already know. That night, I spoke to him. I told him that I knew that the clan was planning something against the village and I knew that he had to stop them. He put me under Tsukiyomi and told me that it was better this way. He let me live out a perfect, happy life. I spent 80 years in that dream world. Then I woke up in the hospital and the Hokage came to see me. Sasuke straightened. He asked me questions, I said. He asked me if I knew why Ani-chan had killed our family. I thought that if I told him the truth he would kill me. And if you knew the truth, he'd kill you too. I'm sorry, Nai-chan. All this time, I wanted to tell you. Sasuke was silent for a long minute. That day when the Hokage came to the shrine, he said, frowning in thought. You were so angry. Get out. I didn't want him anywhere near our family, I said. Or you. Chan, said Sasuke. And when Itachi came for Naruto and put you under Tsukiyomi again. We talked, I said. I told him about everything that had happened to us including Orochimaru and your curse mark. I thought he might know how to help you. Sasuke reached up to touch his neck. Wait. I squinted at him, at the bare spot on his shoulder. Your curse mark, I said. He removed it, said Sasuke. Really? I asked. Oh, right. The Totsuka blade. Itachi must have gotten it at some point and hadn't mentioned it to me. He really did keep a frustrating number of secrets. It's gone. It's not hurting you anymore. Chan, said Sasuke, lowering his hand. I took that as a yes. And then he brought you to the Akatsuki. It wasn't a question, but Sasuke was giving me a searching look. He wanted to protect me, I said. And I wanted to heal him. He was sick. Dying. But I didn't know what he was planning until after he took me. Did they hurt you? Sasuke asked, glancing down at my tattered bloody clothes. I looked particularly awful since I didn't even have my Akatsuki cloak to conceal the worst of it. Itachi had probably taken it before leaving me behind so that Sasuke wouldn't suspect that I was working with them. I grimaced. Ani-chan made a deal with them, I said. As long as I did what they wanted, they never hurt me. But on the day Ani-chan came to take me away, Jiraiya infiltrated the village and I helped him escape. I was hurt, but only because I got in the way. They let me heal myself afterwards even though I betrayed them. Pain had commanded it, in fact. Chan, said Sasuke as he clenched his fists. I'm sorry, I said, as if that made anything better. I looked down at the floor, unable to meet his gaze. Sasuke was silent for a long minute before he let out a slow breath. It's fine, he said. Back then we were weak. There was nothing either of us could have done against the village and you were only trying to keep us alive. If I was in your position, I would have done the same thing. His words should have been reassuring. Should have been. But the way he spoke he might have acknowledged my reasons, but that did nothing to erase his fury. And why should it? His lifelong ambitions were born from a lie. And now he was faced with the reality that Itachi was still his beloved older brother and I had known it all along. All that he'd sacrificed. All that he'd suffered. All of it was for a lie. I'm sorry, I whispered. Sorry wasn't good enough. Sorry didn't change anything. The silence stretched between us. Then Sasuke sighed and there was a rustle of fabric. "Come here, Kyu-chan," he said, his voice a little softer, but not by much. I glanced up and blinked in surprise. In his hand he held something blue. "Is that my ribbon?" I asked. But no. Of course not. My ribbon was old and torn and had probably been relegated to a garbage pile in AIM by now. This ribbon was bright and new. Sasuke gestured for me to approach and I did, taking 2 tentative steps forward. He turned me around and ran his fingers through my hair, gently teasing out the knots before tying the ribbon into place. "I meant to give this to you back then to apologize," he said. "Apologize? For what?" "Oh, that's right. We'd been fighting about my future on Team 7. It seems so long ago. Unimportant, too, after everything that had happened. The night of the massacre, I lost everything. Everything. For a little while, I even thought that I'd lost you too." Sasuke knelt down and pulled me into a hug, wrapping his arms around me for the first time in over 3 years. "I swore that I would never lose you again. I will do anything to keep you safe. I've only ever wanted to protect you. And that will never change." He sounded so completely self-assured and resolute in this simple fact. "But I lied to you for all those years," I said, sniffling. "You should hate me for what I did. It was what I deserved." "I can't," he said simply. "It's not you that I hate. It's Konoha. And I will destroy it for the sake of my revenge." Sasuke's arms tightened around me, his grip becoming almost painful. When I looked up, his eyes were too wide, giving him an alarmingly unhinged expression. "But Konoha is our home and all our friends are there," I said. "Naruto and Kakashi-sensei and..." I trailed off. Sasuke had never really managed to bond with anyone else in Konoha. He'd barely managed a hesitant teacher-student relationship with Kakashi. Even his connection with Naruto felt weaker than it should have been. "I severed those bonds a long time ago," said Sasuke. "They are nothing to me." "What?" I asked. "How can you say that? And what about Karen and Haku? They're vassals of the Uchiha clan." Sure, he hadn't known them for long, but their oath to our family had to count for something. "Karen and Haku followed me when I defected from the village," said Sasuke. "They've been with me ever since and have no more ties to Konoha than I do." "Wait. Karen and Haku went to Hidden Sound. Are they alright?" I asked. Orochimaru had favored Sasuke because Sasuke was meant to be his vessel. Karen and Haku would have had no such protection. And I'd just left them there, left them to deal with whatever horrors Orochimaru chose to inflict on them. Sasuke frowned. "They're fine," he said, as if living under Orochimaru was nothing. "Anyway, it doesn't matter. I will have my revenge." "Nai-chan, the path you're walking down right now will only lead to more darkness and more pain," I said. "Vengeance isn't going to solve anything. It will only hurt you more." "My ambitions lie only in darkness," said Sasuke. "The hatred I feel is more than you can imagine. And even if I could somehow give it up, what then? What is there for me beyond the darkness?" "Naruto. Itachi. Me. You have people who love you," I said. "That is what lies beyond the darkness." That, at least, made Sasuke pause, but only for a moment. "There was a time when we walked together in the light," he said. "Then Itachi chose to walk in darkness to protect us. I have chosen the same path. No one will ever hurt you again. I'll make sure of it. In the meantime, you'll be safe here." "No, I wasn't. In fact there were few places where I was less safe." "Obito will kill me if you defy him," I said. But Sasuke shook his head. "He can't," he said. "Nai-san gave you Shisui's eye. It contained the command protect Uchiha. Obito is incapable of killing you." "Protect me?" Itachi could have commanded Obito to do anything and he'd chosen that. But I supposed I could understand his reasoning. A straightforward kill command was risky. No technique was not completely unbreakable and Kodomatsu Kami could be resisted with a powerful enough Sharingan, especially if the command went against the target's nature. So he'd chosen something safer, something Obito would be less likely to notice or resist. After all, Obito had already expressed a sincere affection for me. And that same affection could be used against him. Unfortunately, the protection wasn't perfect, as Black Zetsu had proven. "Even if that's true, he can still," I began, but I stopped suddenly when the air beside Sasuke swirled. "Time's up, Sasuke," said Obito. "Come. You'll need training if you want to master your Mangyeko Sharingan." Sasuke shot him a glare and briefly tightened his grip before releasing me. "Fine," he said. I looked between them, but speaking now would be dangerous for both of us. I could only watch as Obito placed his hand on Sasuke's shoulder. Neither gave me a parting word as they vanished in a swirl of chakra. Chapter 37. Different Perspectives 3. Tsunade. Tsunade needed a drink. The plum wine she kept in the bottom left drawer. Or maybe something a little stronger. But even if her hand itched to go for the bottles, she still had other responsibilities that required her attention first. She was the Hokage after all. So instead of reaching for the drawer, Tsunade laced her fingers together and met Jiraiya with a level stare. "You're sure?" she asked. Jiraiya ran his remaining hand through his mane of white hair and frowned. He was sitting on the windowsill in her office. It was a casual pose, but Tsunade could detect his elevated heart rate, could see the beads of sweat on his brow, and could hear the subtle labor of his breathing. He shouldn't be out of the hospital. A younger man would have fully recovered by now, but age, it seemed, was finally catching up to him. "There's no doubt about it," said Jiraiya. "To think that Nagato is the one I've been searching for all these years." Tsunade only had vague recollections of the small red-haired boy and his two friends. She hadn't thought much of them at the time. They'd been just another set of victims of a war that was nothing but victims. "You're sure that there isn't another way?" Tsunade clarified. "He was your student after all. For 3 years. Surely that had to count for something." "He seemed pretty determined to kill me," said Jiraiya with a rueful smile. "But I wonder that girl, Kyo. When she interfered with the fight, Pain stopped his attack. She told him that he didn't want to kill me. He denied it, obviously, and yet well, he had to realize that she was healing me, and he had to know that she had access to the Hiraishin." "You think that he let you escape?" Tsunade asked with a raised eyebrow. "Considering the state you were in when you arrived, even I wouldn't take that bet." It had required all of Tsunade's skill and more just to keep him alive. Even then, if it wasn't for the startlingly powerful chakra that had permeated Jiraiya's entire body, she was certain that he wouldn't have made it. The healing chakra had been almost inhuman in its potency, far beyond anything that Tsunade had ever encountered, and Tsunade had encountered quite a lot. Apparently it had been supplied by Uchiha Kyo. "Maybe you're right," said Jiraiya. "Maybe it's just wishful thinking on my part. But I can't help but believe that if he truly wanted me dead, I wouldn't be sitting here right now." Tsunade hummed. "So where does that leave us?" she asked. "He's going to continue targeting Naruto. If that happens, you will fight again. And you're not in any state to win that battle." Tsunade nodded to his empty sleeve. "You're right about that," he said. "I'm taking Naruto to Mount Myaboku to learn Sage Mode. As for Nagato, well, Kyo said that if there was anyone who would listen to his ideals, it was me. It's not much, but I might be able to get him to talk." Tsunade did agree with him on one point. It did sound like wishful thinking. Something of her thoughts must have shown on her face because Jiraiya gave a deep belly laugh. "Yeah, I thought you might feel that way about it," he said. "Anyway, Sage Mode isn't something that can be learned overnight. I'll take Naruto now and leave one of my messenger toads. If anything happens, contact me immediately." He was in no condition to leave, but Tsunade made no objection. They both knew that some things couldn't wait. "Don't you worry," he said. "I'm sure Ma and Pa will take good care of me while I'm there. I can already taste the bug soup." "Ugh." His groan was only partially feigned. Jiraiya slid from the windowsill, moving with the care of a tired old man and turning away with a wave. He was always leaving, always off on his next mission. Tsunade wanted to run after him, grab him by the shoulder, and tell him to stay. After his latest injury, surely he should be ready to retire. He wasn't a young man anymore, just like she wasn't the young woman she appeared to be. "The pursuit of happiness is not for us." That's what he'd told her before his mission to AIM. She'd begged him to come back alive, and he had. She was tired of living with the pain of loss and the fear of losing more. But he was always working toward a brighter future. He continued on with hope and optimism for the next generation. So Tsunade let him go once more and quietly reached for a drink. "Jiraiya." Jiraiya raised his arm to fold it across his chest before recalling the futility of the motion. Despite the time that had passed, he was still getting accustomed to his missing arm. Instead he settled for placing his remaining hand on his hip. Thankfully Naruto and Pa were too busy performing frog kata to notice. The warm well of pride filled Jiraiya's chest. That knucklehead really had come a long way. To master Sage Mode in such a short time when Jiraiya still needed assistance from Ma and Pa, even after all these years. It truly was the destiny of the younger generation to surpass the one that came before it, and Jiraiya was only glad that he had lived to see it. He had come very close to not seeing it. Jiraiya frowned, grasping the nub of his missing arm beneath the fabric of his sleeve. Yes. Very close. All because of his own failures as a teacher. He told Tsunade that he was bringing Naruto to Mount Myaboku for training, and while that was true, it was not his only purpose. Jiraiya needed answers, and he was hoping that Gamamaru might be able to provide them. Jiraiya had once been told that his destiny was to train a student who had the power to either save or destroy the world. He was confident that he had done so. But which of his students was the child of destiny? Naruto or Nagato? Depending on the answer, the world was either saved or doomed. Unfortunately, Gamamaru hadn't been able to provide any answers. Instead he could only offer another concern, one that Jiraiya had never even considered possible. That the future was changing. Some things that were once certain were now not. Some things that should not have been now were. And whether this was a boon or a disaster remained to be seen. Gamamaru couldn't even say how or why this was happening. "Don't look so glum, Jiraiya-chan," Gamamaru had said. "Destiny has a way of sorting itself out." That wasn't the reassurance Gamamaru obviously thought it should be. But Jiraiya couldn't afford to spend too much time pondering philosophical concepts like the malleability of fate. He wasn't only a sage, after all. He was a shinobi. A shinobi with a job to do. But despite his desire to focus on the upcoming confrontation between his two students, something else was gnawing at the back of his mind. Something that had been bothering him for a while now. The Uchiha siblings. They were a mystery that had existed in Jiraiya's periphery for quite some time. Now more than ever because Kyo's fate might hold the power to break the world. That wasn't an exaggeration either, though Jiraiya would very much have preferred that it was. Naruto was nothing if not impassioned when it came to his friends. After Jiraiya's return, Naruto was ready to go running off after Kyo. Only Tsunade had managed to stop him. She'd convinced him to take a team and go after Sasuke first. It was meant purely as a distraction, something to keep him occupied while Jiraiya recovered and formulated a plan to deal with pain. They hadn't expected to learn of Kyo's death. Or that Sasuke was the one to kill her. It had to be a lie, Naruto had said. Sasuke would never, could never, hurt Kyo. He remained adamant with a quiet desperate sort of anguish. It had to be a lie. Kyo had to be alive. Because if she wasn't, if Sasuke really had killed her. Jiraiya knew well enough what it meant when a former friend turned to the darkness. There was no coming back from that. And if that happened, if Naruto really had lost the only two people he'd ever considered his true friends, one by the hand of the other, what would happen then? So of course it had to be a lie. Naruto could not accept anything else. For Naruto's sake, Jiraiya hoped that he was right. And yet if Kyo was still alive, why hadn't she returned to Konoha? Why hadn't Sasuke? Naruto had no answers, but he remained unwavering in his belief. Jiraiya might have been inclined to write it off as denial, but he had to admit that the entire situation didn't add up. As a ninja, Jiraiya had spent many long years peddling in secrets and uncovering plots. Over time, he'd developed a sense for them. He knew little enough about Sasuke, but both Naruto and Kakashi were certain that he'd lived only to protect his sister. Every action, every choice he had made since the massacre was in service of that goal. So why? Why would he decide to kill her? Was it the same reason Itachi had chosen to kill his clan? According to Kakashi, Itachi had once seemed to deeply love his family. Until the night when he'd left only two of them alive. For power, he'd said. As a test. And then there was Kyo. She had been stolen by Itachi and taken to the Akatsuki as a prisoner. But her abilities should have made her nearly impossible to contain. And when Jiraiya had met her in aim, she hadn't acted like a captive at all. If she was capable of rescuing Jiraiya, she should have been able to do the same for herself. Could it be that she had simply chosen to remain? Or rather, that she'd had a reason to avoid returning to Konoha. But why? Underneath. What was he missing? What if his assumptions were wrong? What if Itachi truly did love his family? What if Kyo was not as captive as she'd seemed? What if Sasuke's goal was still to save his little sister? It was an absurd hypothetical given the circumstances, and yet. Jiraiya was in the business of knowing things. He knew about the rumors of discontent within the Uchiha clan after the Kyuubi attack. He knew about the suspicion and surveillance of the clan. He knew that the person most vocal against them had been Danzo. Danzo? The leader of Rude and Itachi's direct superior until the massacre. Danzo was a man who worked from the shadows. He had little direct interaction with anyone, except right before Kyo had gone to confront Itachi, Danzo had sent a team of Anbu to collect her from the hospital. For her protection, Danzo had claimed. And yet the Anbu had tried to kill her vassal and had fought Guy when she'd escaped. That didn't sound like protection to Jiraiya. It wouldn't have sounded like protection to Itachi either. Or to Sasuke if he knew. Danzo. Itachi. Kyo. Sasuke. An image began to form in Jiraiya's mind, like a puzzle whose pieces were falling into place. An image of hatred, betrayal, fear, and revenge. An image that would be disastrous for Konoha. And worse for Naruto. Jiraiya-chan. Jiraiya's head snapped up to see Pa and Naruto with a messenger toad. Naruto's expression was a mix of surprise and grim determination. Konoha is under attack. Nagato. His goal was finally within his grasp. Every step forward, every sacrifice was in preparation for this moment. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki lay at his feet, pinned by his Rinnegan chakra receivers. His sensei, Jiraiya, was likewise impaled, still alive but only barely. It hadn't been an easy fight. Nagato could admit that. But even the full weight of the Kyuubi Jinchuriki's unbridled fury was not enough to stand against a god. Could they feel it? Did they finally know pain? Nagato knew pain. He knew it when his parents were murdered before his eyes. He knew it when Yahiko sacrificed himself on Nagato's blade to save Konan. And he knew it when he watched Madara drag Kyo-chan away into the kamui dimension. Yes, Nagato knew pain. And he knew hatred too. For Konoha. For Hanzo and Danzo. And now for Madara, Itachi, and Sasuke. Nagato had been surprised when Madara had returned to aim with both Uchiha brothers at his side. According to Madara, Sasuke had murdered Kyo-chan to gain the power he needed to kill Itachi. But once Sasuke had attained this new power, Madara had convinced him to join them instead. Impossible. Or perhaps not. Kyo-chan had once said that Itachi was a kind and gentle boy, a sweet older brother who had comforted her when she was ill and who had cared for her when she was weak. It was only after he'd sought power via the massacre that he changed. Perhaps it was the same with Sasuke, a boy who had supposedly lived his life to protect his younger sister and who had only ever sought death for his older brother. Perhaps there was some sickness within the Uchiha that caused them to go insane when they unleashed the greater powers of the Sharingan. A sickness that Madara had exploited for his own gain. That was the only explanation Nagato had. And it made him hate the three of them even more. But Nagato could not deal with them yet. Not until he had achieved his dream and brought about true peace. So he'd sent the brothers to retrieve the Hachibi instead, both as a test of Sasuke's abilities and to see if they truly were willing to work alongside one another. It would certainly make things easier for Nagato if they couldn't. Unfortunately, they'd captured the Hachibi easily and had worked together with the remaining Akatsuki members to seal it away, leaving only one Jinchuriki left to capture. The one that lay before Nagato now. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki. Kyo-chan's former teammate. The friend that she had wanted to save. Nagato did not regret his actions. He couldn't. After all, this is what he had sought for all these years. Revenge against the people who had wronged him. Divine retribution. Konoha was a smoldering crater bereft of life. After everything that they had done to him and his home, he'd expected to feel some form of satisfaction. But he didn't. Instead, he felt empty and could only recall the soft words Kyo-chan had once spoken to him. "I can't tell you that you shouldn't feel that way," she'd said. "But raising whole villages and killing other innocents isn't the answer. When you destroy Konoha and kill Danzo, will that be enough to heal the pain in your heart? Hatred just keeps burning and burning, consuming everything in its path. And if you keep going down that path, I don't think there will be anything left." That's not the type of peace Yahiko wanted, was it? Yahiko was dead. He was killed by those who did not know pain. If they'd known pain as he did, they would never have inflicted it on someone so well-meaning and innocent. Some like. Remember the people you loved and remember what they wanted to protect. The world. Yahiko wanted to protect the world. So had Kyo-chan. And by teaching the world how to feel pain, Nagato was protecting it too. Pain made me vulnerable and scared and angry. I made myself kind. Nagato was God. He felt nothing but. You're more than just your pain. Nagato wasn't so sure anymore. His retribution had been achieved. So why did he feel only regret? No matter what happens, I can't hate someone who puts their whole heart into doing what they believe is right. Was this right? Hatred was a natural response to suffering. It was the only response. Except. I don't hate you. Nagato closed his eyes briefly before opening them again. He stared down at Naruto and Jiraiya, both pinned to the broken ground and helpless before him. He was so close. Only 2 more deaths. What did it matter if one was his former sensei and the other was Kyo-chan's precious friend? It didn't matter at all. And yet. Nagato knelt. "Let's talk," he said. "There is something I want to ask you." Danzo? Danzo scowled at the report. If it was true, then it put all of Konoha in grave danger. Still, at least the report had been brought to him and not Tsunade, who was still in a coma due to her ill-advised attempt to save the village. That woman was weak, even worse than Hiruzen. At least with Hiruzen in charge, Danzo had been somewhat content with safeguarding Konoha from the shadows, but Tsunade was grotesquely soft-hearted and weak-willed. With her out of the way, and after years of planning and preparation, Danzo had finally achieved his goal of ascending to the position of Hokage. But his satisfaction was short-lived. The situation in Konoha was dire enough without this adding to his concerns. Danzo wasn't sure how exactly Naruto had done it, but just when it seemed that everything was lost, Nagato had backed down and had even used the Rin rebirth to resurrect the people of Konoha. That should have been impossible. No one should have enough life energy to resurrect an entire village and survive. Rebirth techniques usually killed the one using them even if they were saving a single life. To bring back tens of thousands and still survive. From what Danzo had been told, Nagato attributed his continued life to the Rinnegan, his Uzumaki heritage and the extensive healing he had received from Uchiha Kyo during her time with the Akatsuki. Because of Nagato's display of power and his penance of restoring everyone to life, the daimyo and the clan heads had flatly refused to declare war on AIM, despite Danzo's repeated warnings. They were more focused on rebuilding Konoha than the looming threat of an untamed Rinnegan wielder. That brat Jiraiya wasn't making things easy, either. Though the Sannin had no interest in the position of Hokage, he'd made it clear that if Danzo tried to take action against Nagato, he would put forth his own candidacy instead. Danzo was no fool. If Jiraiya requested the position, he would get it. He was too popular, both with the daimyo and with the shinobi of the village. And Jiraiya's hint that he knew or suspected something about the Uchiha massacre was just another layer of added threat. If that was the case, a lost candidacy would be the least of Danzo's problems. Thankfully, right now, Jiraiya was more concerned with training Naruto to control the Kyuubi. But if Danzo pushed things too far, that wouldn't last. Declaring war on a new ally, no matter how dangerous, would see Danzo removed from power before the ink was dry on the paper. So he was forced to move in the shadows once more, keeping an eye on Nagato and Konan as they helped Jiraiya to train Naruto. In the meantime, this other problem required his attention, and it was, perhaps, even more dangerous than having the leader of the Akatsuki inside their ruined village. It was a missive from the Raikage detailing the attack and abduction of the Hachibi Jinchuriki. That alone would have been news worth celebrating if it weren't for the identity of the assailants. Uchiha Sasuke and Itachi. The paper crumpled in Danzo's hands. Damn him. Damn that Itachi. So, he hadn't managed to keep the village's secrets after all. He'd relented at the end and had revealed the truth to his younger brother. There was no alternative explanation. And Danzo had lost any leverage he might have had against the two when Itachi had abducted his younger sister. That left him with precious little to work with and few avenues to success. According to their intelligence, Kyo had apparently been killed by Sasuke to attain his mangyeko Sharingan. Danzo didn't believe it. Not for a moment. Itachi would never allow something like that to happen. And yet Sasuke's mangyeko Sharingan had been verified and Danzo knew exactly how it was attained. Of course, Itachi's missing eye had also been verified. Yes. Itachi would never use Izanagi to save his own life. But his sister? Absolutely. There was little, perhaps nothing, Itachi would not do for his younger siblings. And if he had saved her, Itachi was the type of man to spirit her away to some safe location where Danzo would not be able to get to her. There was no doubt about it, Danzo would need to remove all of the Uchiha siblings. For the good of the village. Danzo set aside the report and examined the other document he had requested. It had been written years ago, ever since Itachi had abducted Kyo. Danzo had simply been waiting for the opportunity to use it. He would have preferred to do things quietly, but Tsunade had left things for far too long. And now Konoha was weakened. Vulnerable. If this wasn't handled quickly, it might be the final blow needed to destroy the village once and for all. Danzo took his pen and signed the order. With this, all Konoha shinobi had new instructions regarding Uchiha Itachi, Uchiha Sasuke, and Uchiha Kyo. Till on sight. Naruto. I hate everything about you. It's his fault. Go away. No one will ever accept you. Naruto grit his teeth as the fox's malevolent hatred poisoned his chakra, slipping further into his heart with every accusation. Naruto had to focus on pulling out the Kyuubi's chakra and making it his own. But it was hard. This wasn't a battle of punches and kicks, but a battle of will. The pervy sage and Nagato were helping to keep the Kyuubi contained from the outside, but Naruto was alone within. Alone but for the voices. The voices of the villagers who hated him echoing in his head, distracting him. And there was another voice, one that sounded just like him. Only dark and angry. They're all the same, it said. They hate us. All of them. That's not true, said Naruto. The villagers, everyone, they all called me a hero. You're blinded to the truth just because they're making a big deal about you now, said the voice. But that doesn't change what they did to us. They were the ones who lied to us for years. They turned us into a pariah. They hated us. They only changed their minds when we became useful to them. But they're still the same. If we hadn't saved them, they'd still be treating us like trash. No, I have friends, said Naruto. That's right. He had friends and teachers. The villagers don't matter because I have precious people. Precious people? The voice echoed, mocking. What precious people? Iruka-sensei. He hated us. He blamed us for his parents' deaths. All he did was scream and yell at us. No, said Naruto. He saved me from Mizuki. That was his job, said the voice. He'd have done it for anyone. We're not special. The truth of those words burned because Iruka would have saved any of his students. Iruka didn't care about him. A bubble of anger rose up, but Naruto pushed it back down. Kakashi-sensei and the pervy sage, said Naruto. Yes, Iruka wasn't his only teacher. He had others, and they definitely. Kakashi shoved us off on that loser Abisu at the first opportunity so that he could train Sasuke, said the voice. And you think Jiraiya cares about us? Don't make me laugh. To get his advice, we had to turn into a naked girl and beg. Not that it helped much. Just look at how pathetic we were compared to Sasuke after 3 years of training. We were nothing but a walking coin purse that he used to get women and booze. More bubbles of anger and chakra rose up and Naruto tried again to push them away. Not true, he said. I have friends. But it is true, said the voice. What friends do you think we have? Our classmates. They all think we're a loser. They always have. Dead last. The angry chakra rose like a tidal wave, threatening to drown him. Sasuke. Abandoned us, said the voice. We were just baggage to him, something to weigh him down. He severed whatever bond you thought you had with him. We're the ones who keep crawling back, clinging at his heels. Pitiful loser. Just like the villagers always said. Naruto was drowning. No. Why do you keep lying to yourself? The voice asked. You know that it's true. Nobody cares about us. Nobody loves us. Kyo-chan. Naruto shouted, gasping for air within the torrent of burning, malevolent chakra. She's always believed in me. She said that when we both achieve our dreams, we can be together. So I can't lose here. I still have to become Hokage. But despite his words, Naruto felt himself being pulled down into the Kyuubi's hate. He had to fight. He just needed to. She's dead already or will be soon, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Naruto froze. Because the voice was right. Kyo-chan was gone, and he didn't know where. Everyone was saying that she was dead. That Sasuke had killed her. He didn't believe that. Not for a moment. But even if she was alive, that Danzo guy had issued an order of execution for both her and Sasuke. For betraying the village. But she wouldn't do that. They were wrong. He had to. You can't save her, said the voice. You're weak. But I can make us strong. He didn't have any friends here. Not really. Not anymore. They all hated him. They just wanted to use him. And to kill the only person who had ever really cared about him. If she was dead. If they killed her. Naruto sank further into the boiling hatred, feeling the anger and loathing build inside him like a spreading, noxious wound. That's right, whispered the voice. They hate us. And we hate them. I hate Naruto murmured, falling further into darkness. I hate them. But just as the darkness threatened to swallow him completely, a bright golden light burst forth around him. It felt like an embrace. Kyo-chan. Naruto called out, reaching up. But it wasn't Kyo-chan who stood beside him in the warmth and light. It was a woman in a green dress with long, red hair. She smiled at him, and he felt the Kyuubi's hatred ebb away like a shadow shrinking before the dawn. Her eyes were so soft. Naruto. Sasuke. It was said that the Uchiha clan suffered from the curse of hatred. That they loved too deeply. So deeply that when the source of their love was taken away, they were driven mad with fury. Sasuke wasn't sure that he agreed with that. After the Kyuubi's attack on Konoha, the third Hokage had unfairly punished the Uchiha clan by cordoning them off in a small section away from the village and putting them under surveillance. What was the clan's response? To grumble and complain but ultimately to accept the decision. As the relationship between the clan and village deteriorated further, the grumbling had gotten worse, but it was still just that. Grumbling. No one had acted. And that, more than anything, was what led to their downfall. The clan had hesitated to embrace hatred and destruction. Danzo had not. Then there was Itachi. After the death of Shisui, he'd been faced with a choice and he'd chosen to reject the curse of hatred. He'd embraced Konoha's will of fire instead, putting the greater good above himself and his family. He'd sacrificed everything to protect the village. And what reward had he been granted? A life of being hated and hunted by the very people he had saved. And of course there was Kyo-chan. She loved just as deeply as any of them. No. She loved even more. There was no hatred in her. None at all. She hadn't just rejected the curse of hatred. Hatred simply held no sway over her. Neither did anger. The few times that Sasuke had seen her outrage, it had flared and vanished in moments, unable to stay in a heart that loved so much. That was why Sasuke could never hate her or even be upset with her for long. Though she had kept secrets, she'd done it to protect him. If Itachi's reward for rejecting hate was to endure that same hate, then Kyo-chan's reward was to endure a life of terror. No, Sasuke couldn't be angry with them. He loved them both. And because he loved them, he hated. He hated Danzo. He hated Konoha. He hated everyone that had ever caused a single moment of the pain that his brother and sister had borne to protect him. Sasuke was not his clan, or his brother, or his sister. They had all been blinded to reality. They'd been swayed by Konoha's warped ideals. Standing by while the village crushed the clan under its heel was not peace. Allowing wrongs to go unpunished was not justice. Forgiving the unforgivable was not kindness. There was a time, once, when the Uchiha clan had embraced the curse of hatred. And because of that, their clan had been strong. Feared. But Konoha had slowly chipped away at their strength, deafening and declawing them until they became weak. And then, when the embers of a long-forgotten hatred had begun to glow again, Konoha had destroyed them. But from these ashes a new flame would burn, one that would not be stamped out. Because Sasuke would not hesitate. He did not care about the greater good. And his heart had room enough to love his family and to hate the world. Sasuke knew the truth. The curse of hatred was never a curse upon the Uchiha clan. It was a curse upon their enemies. Sasuke was an avenger. And he had so much to avenge. So much to hate. Itachi. His villager, his clan. Itachi blocked Sasuke's katana with a kunai, angling the blade down to create an opening in his guard, but Sasuke widened the space between them before Itachi could attack. Itachi had been 13 years old when he'd made that choice for the very first time. He thought then that it would be the only time. One sacrifice to save the village and his precious younger siblings. Then he could protect them all from the shadows, never having to choose between them again. Sasuke was on him once more, his blade lightning fast as he tried to find a weakness in Itachi's defense. Itachi blocked every strike, his precision matching Sasuke's speed. And yet here he was, with the same choice once more. Sasuke grew impatient with his lack of progress and leaped back to perform a fireball jutsu. Foolish. Itachi dodged with a body flicker and caught Sasuke in a jinjutsu, sending an illusion to attack Sasuke's back. Sasuke turned to face the false threat. How had things gone so wrong? Itachi slid his kunai along Sasuke's throat, stopping at his younger brother's pulse point as he dispelled the jinjutsu. Sasuke stiffened, his muscles immediately reacting to retaliate, but Itachi pressed the blade deeper into his skin, just shy of drawing blood. Sasuke froze and then yielded, acknowledging that he had lost their match. Frustration makes you reckless, said Itachi, lowering the kunai. Let's stop for now. I can keep going, Sasuke objected. Itachi was sure that he could. Sasuke was improving at a startling rate and could best Itachi in a fight 4 times out of every 10. Soon they would be evenly matched. And then it wouldn't be long before Sasuke would surpass him. Let's stop for now, Itachi repeated. Sasuke scowled, but his gaze flicked to Itachi's milk-white eye, and he relented. Itachi led Sasuke to the edge of the arena and tossed him a water bottle. Sasuke caught it with a grunt and they both turned to watch Kisam's fight against Karin and Haku. The matchup was surprisingly even. Haku was a rare talent whose ice abilities and speed were a near-perfect counter to Kisam's skillset, and while Karin had less talent, she had more raw power, and her recently awakened chakra chains were serving her well in combat. They were improving. They all needed to improve after word had reached them of Pain's betrayal and his subsequent alliance with Konoha. According to Zetsu, he and Konan were apparently training Naruto to control the Kyuubi's power. With their departure, the Akatsuki was truly broken. And the threats against them were mounting. Nai-san, when will you go to see her? Sasuke asked suddenly, voicing the source of the question that Itachi had been turning over in his mind. His villager, his clan. Soon, said Itachi vaguely. He'd been avoiding their reunion ever since he'd awakened to find that Sasuke knew the truth. Because now his village and his clan stood against each other once more. And Itachi was faced with the same choice. Sasuke wanted revenge against Danzo and the village, and so he had chosen to ally with Obito. Standing alongside them would mean allowing death and destruction on a scale unseen since the last Shinobi War. Perhaps not even then. But to stand against them meant dooming Kyo-chan to spend the rest of her life trapped within the Kamui dimension because Itachi had no means to rescue her. The best thing he could offer her in that situation was the mercy of a quick death. Don't keep her waiting too long, said Sasuke, giving him a sidelong look. She worries about you. Itachi let out a quiet sigh. I know, he said. Sasuke had avoided answering Kyo-chan's questions about Itachi's well-being, not wanting her to know that Itachi had sacrificed his eye to resurrect her. An unnecessary omission since Itachi suspected that she already knew. Still, Itachi felt a rush of fondness for Sasuke at his reticence. It would have been easy for Sasuke to use that information against her. The weapon meant to inflict pain and guilt as revenge for her part in Itachi's lies. But Sasuke hadn't done so. Despite everything, he still wanted to shield Kyo-chan from the harsher truths of their world. And for that, Itachi could only be grateful. Even if it made his choice that much more difficult. His villager, his clan. He'd believed once that he could manipulate Sasuke and Kyo-chan into doing what he thought was best, avoiding the conflict altogether, but that had only ended in failure. And it had brought him here, to a crossroads of nothing but bad choices. The entire world or his younger siblings. When he phrased it like that, his decision became a foregone conclusion. He only pretended that it wasn't because he knew what he would have to do. But he would not keep Kyo-chan waiting any longer. He had made his choice. Chapter 38. Growing Pains. Ani-chan. I shouted, leaping into his arms when he appeared in a swirl of air. It was difficult to track time within the Kamui dimension, but it must have been months since I'd seen him last, and that had been in the aftermath of his fight with Sasuke. Are you okay? Not waiting for an answer, I ran a diagnostic jutsu on him. He wasn't outwardly wounded, which was a relief. But I frowned at the feel of his chakra. It was pained. Not as bad as if he'd endured a mental attack like Tsukiyomi, but he was still hurting. I projected positive intent to soothe him. It seemed to work, at least a little. "Hyo-chan," Itachi murmured, holding me close. "I am sorry. I should have come to see you sooner." I just shook my head. "It's alright," I said, smiling. "It's not like I'm going anywhere." There was a sudden spike of pain in Itachi's chakra. Okay, wrong thing to say. I held him tighter and increased my positive intent. His chakra rippled, wavering. "I am glad that you are still here," he said. "I was not certain that you would be." Huh? I didn't understand what he was suggesting. "I can't leave the kamui dimension without Obito," I told him. He already knew that. Itachi pulled back a bit and I looked up at him, at his mismatched eyes, one dark and focused, the other cloudy and white. "I was not certain that you would be alive," he clarified. I didn't understand. "Obito can't hurt me," I said. He knew that too. The shadow crossed Itachi's face. "Obito is not the one I feared would hurt you," he said quietly. I didn't want to understand. I looked away. Itachi stroked my hair, but I kept my gaze turned downward. "Kyo-chan," he said softly. "Kyo-chan, please look at me." I didn't. I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to face what I'd been so steadfastly ignoring for all of these years. I didn't want to admit it, not even to myself. Itachi sighed. "I once thought that my death would cleanse me of my sins," he said. "That everything would be made right as long as my death could turn Sasuke into a hero and send you home safely. But I see now that what I held was a naive and imperfect dream. Because I did not truly consider the life and the world that I would be leaving for you and whether or not you would want it." There was a long moment of silence and I finally looked up at him. It was his turn to look away. "When I saw you for the first time after returning to Konoha, I was happy," he said. "I'd feared that you would grow up during our time apart and that I wouldn't even recognize you. I told myself that it did not matter. As long as you and Sasuke were alive, I needed nothing else. But instead you were just the same as you were when we'd parted, not only in body, but in your heart and mind too. It was as if I'd never left at all. When we spoke in Tsukiyomi, it felt like coming home." Itachi looked off into the distance of the kamui dimension, his expression hollow and sad. "And so you stayed," he continued. "I never spoke to you about it, never objected, not even after you remained a child when you no longer required constant healing. And that was for my own selfish reasons. I had cast aside everything else in this world. Everything but Sasuke's life and you. I did not want you to grow up. And that was my mistake. My failure. I only ever thought of what I wanted and I always lied to you, never even asking for forgiveness. And I never asked." He trailed off. "Do you want to grow up?" It was a simple question. One that should have had a simple answer. "I don't know," I said, speaking at last. "I should have wanted to grow up. I'd been grown up for my entire life here. I just never thought I would." There was another long silence. Itachi simply held me, waiting for me to be ready. "When I was little, I was always sick and I thought that I would die young," I said. Technically true, though those facts were unrelated. "Then that night happened, you put me under Tsukiyomi and I spent 80 years living in a dream world. So, you see, I've actually been a little old lady this whole time." I tried to give a smile, like it was a joke, but it felt weak. Wrong. I let it fall. I died in that dream world. And then I woke up. Itachi was only 13 at the time. He hadn't understood the cruelty of his mercy. "I was a child again, sick and weak," I said. "I wish that things would go back to the way they were. Back before everything went wrong. I just wanted things to stay the same. I just wanted to." "The what?" "To wake up again. To have everything erased and brought back to the way it once was." But this wasn't Tsukiyomi. It wasn't a nightmare to be undone with the coming of daylight. This was reality. Cold, brutal, unrelenting reality. And yet here I was waiting for it all to end. Like I was still standing at the door to the dojo with Itachi facing me in the moonlight. I'd only offered the smallest of objections when he'd given me a perfect world of dreams. I hadn't understood the cruelty of his mercy either. "I wasn't supposed to survive," I whispered. "I was supposed to die that night. But I didn't. Then the world just moved on and I was left behind. Until that night, every moment of my life was in preparation for my death. It was supposed to be a story told and ended. But it didn't end. It just kept going and I remained a small frightened child waiting for a death that never came. And so I'd tried to give myself the death that I'd been denied. I'd offered Itachi my life when we met after the invasion. I'd offered it so that Sasuke could gain his mangyeko Sharingan. But Itachi had refused. I'd tried again with the Hashirama cells after I'd realized that my existence had caused Gaara's death. I'd thought that if I died in pursuit of a cure for Itachi and others, that it would be worth it. but Obito was there to save me. I tried again with Jiraiya, throwing myself in front of Pain's attack. I'd thought that Nagato would surely kill me for my betrayal, but I hadn't expected him to grant me mercy. I'd actually succeeded with Sasuke. When I'd seen Mikoto, the overwhelming emotion that I'd been too afraid to name had been relief. Relief that finally, after everything, at long last, it was finally over. All of my pain. All of my fear. All of my doubt. Everything could be washed away. I'd never once asked for paradise. All I wanted was for everything to stop. But then Itachi pulled me back. And the weight of the world was returned to my shoulders once more. But even then, even after Itachi gave his eye to save me, I still couldn't stop. When I faced Obito, I could have escaped with my brothers using the Hiraishin, but I hadn't because I hadn't wanted to. I'd put barriers and protections around my brothers but not myself because I hadn't wanted to. I'd realized that Obito was stalling for time, but I didn't finish him off because I hadn't wanted to. What I'd wanted was for him to kill me. It would be fine as long as I died while protecting my brothers. The way I hadn't protected Shisui and the rest of my family. And when, against all odds, it seemed that I would win anyway, I'd even revealed that I knew his true identity, a sure way to guarantee that he would have to kill me. But then he didn't because of the command Itachi had placed into Shisui's eye. By then Obito had realized what I was trying to do, so he'd placed a seal on my heart to prevent me from ending my own life. Itachi must have realized it too. Of course he would. I'd asked him to return my body to the clan grounds in Konoha. So that I could finally be in the only place I felt that I truly belonged. Sometimes it is not for us to decide what was supposed to happen, said Itachi gently. Perhaps you were never supposed to live. But you did. And I am glad for it, whether it was supposed to happen or not. Hot tears fell down my face as my body shook. I'm just so scared all the time, I mumbled. First Zabuza, then Gaara, Pain, and now Obito. One after another. I'd been swept up and carried off to places and battles far beyond me. I'd lived by chance and the mercy of those who took my fate into their hands. What do you need to no longer be afraid? Itachi asked. Good question. I'd never really thought about it, never even considered it a possibility. How could I when I knew exactly what was coming? Although that wasn't entirely true, was it? After my initial panic on realizing what world I'd been reborn into, I hadn't been particularly afraid of dying in the massacre. Sure, when the night had finally arrived, I'd considered running away. But I hadn't. I'd gone to meet Itachi and my death willingly. But afterwards I'd been cast out into a sea of uncertainty, populated only by the monsters that I knew were coming for me and my brothers. No, I wasn't afraid because I knew the future. I was afraid because I didn't know my future. And how could I when it was never for me to decide? Every time I tried to choose my own path, someone else had swooped in to change my course. I was left constantly fumbling, trying to maintain some semblance of control over my own life when in reality, I had no control at all. And so I was afraid. And I clung to the last moment of my life when I felt like I truly knew what would become of me. I trailed off. The silence was filled with agony, like an old wound reopened. All of my pain and my regret. It hurt so much. I looked down, clenching my skirt in my small fists. Obito had been kind enough to bring me a fresh, unbloodied outfit shortly after Sasuke's visit. But the pristine white felt wrong, somehow. Like a lie. All this time I kept you safe under my wing, but I never allowed you to stand by my side, said Itachi. I didn't want to involve you and drag you into my darkness. And now I think that I should have trusted you and Sasuke. Instead I acted alone, and this is where my decisions have brought us. He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, the right one was the red and black of his mangyeko Sharingan. So now I will face you fully, he said. I will speak only the truth and not the pretty lies meant to keep you safe. This world we live in has brought you nothing but pain, and so I will not stand beside it while you suffer. If you want revenge against the world and Konoha as Sasuke does, then I will burn this world to ash. And if you want to leave it all behind, to leave this life of fear and anguish, then I will lay you to rest. Whatever it is you want, whatever you decide I will make it so. It should have been an easy choice. After all, I'd been trying so hard to end my pain for all these years. And with Obito keeping me captive, my death would set my brothers free. And yet. I began. What did I need? It was simple really. What I needed was to borrow your cloak. Itachi's expression, once deathly serious, fell into a look of utter confusion. The shift was comical enough to make me smile. Because I still want to save this world, I said. And to do that, I'll need to grow up. And to grow up, I'll need an outfit that fits. Even after 3 years of separation, when they arrived, I knew them right away. Haku's frame was still light and his features were still delicate. He wore an elaborately embroidered white kimono with voluminous sleeves, as well as pale blue hakama pants. The overall look made him seem even more feminine than ever, like a Uchiha from fairy tales brought to life. Perrin, too, had grown. Her hair was longer and she wore a long-sleeved purple shirt with shorts and stockings. Her expression was locked into a scowl as she surveyed the kamui dimension. When her eyes landed on me, she had a look of surprise and anger. Haku knelt immediately and bowed his head. "Kyo-sama," he said, the word in almost reverent prayer. Perrin remained standing, her head bowed and her hands balled into fists. It's not fair," she said, her shoulders shaking. "I thought of what they'd been through because of me. I should have been there. I should have protected them. I'd brought them to Konoha with the promise of safety and a better life, but instead they'd been dragged into darkness and left to the whims of Orochimaru. I wasn't sure what I could say to undo everything they'd endured. They must have suffered so much while I was gone." I opened my mouth, but Karen spoke first. "How's everyone in your family so gorgeous?" Karen shouted, lifting her head to glare at me. "It's not fair." Of course she was angry. She'd obviously. "Wait. What?" I asked dumbly, but Karen continued on, heedless of my interruption. "I thought Sasuke-sama was good looking, but Itachi-sama is on a whole other level." She ranted, her expression shifting into one of dreamy ideation. A tinge of pink dusted her cheeks as she went on. "His face. I thought it was so cold at first, but his smile, I could look at that all day. And he's so kind. That bastard Obito wanted to get rid of us, but Itachi-sama talked him out of it. And you?" She rounded on me, jabbing an accusatory finger in my direction, her expression snapping back into a scowl. "You're so beautiful it's almost annoying. That face. That hair. And where exactly did those come from?" I looked down, following the direction of her pointed finger straight toward my chest. "Oh. After my discussion with Itachi, I'd used my transformation technique to develop my body to its proper age. As a result, I'd grown noticeably taller with longer hair that now reached almost to my knees, and my face had shed the soft roundness of childhood to reveal the delicate aristocratic features common among the Uchiha. I was also now rather, top-heavy, which I suspected was due to the Hashirama cells, at least if Tsunade's reputation was anything to go by. I was currently wearing Itachi's Akatsuki cloak and was holding the front closed because I didn't trust the button to handle the task. Itachi had promised to return with something that fit properly, but until then, I had to make do with this. I looked at Karen, back at my chest, and finally at her once more. "They just grew?" I said uncertainly, not quite sure how we were having this conversation. "You have a full body transformation technique," said Karen, grabbing my shoulders and shaking me. "And you expect me to believe that those are a gift from heaven? Don't be selfish. Teach me your jutsu." Before I could protest my innocence, Haku was suddenly there. "Karen, release Kyo-sama," he said, his voice soft but firm as he placed a hand on Karen's shoulder. There was a hint of intent behind his words, which made me pause. Karen scoffed, but she stopped shaking me and let me go. "Sorry," I muttered, whatever scraps of apology I'd scraped together fleeing under the weight of my distilled bewilderment. "There is no need to apologize," said Haku smoothly. "We are simply glad that you are unharmed." "Right. And what about you?" I asked. "We are well, Kyo-sama," said Haku with a smile. I wasn't quite sure I believed that. Now that I had a moment to examine them, Haku's chakra felt off. Cold and dark. Not unlike Sasuke's. And his smile felt so icy. It was all wrong. I tentatively reached up to take his hand and ran a diagnostic jutsu. He was indeed unhurt. There was no sign of a curse mark, past or present, though the sheer frostiness of his chakra made me shiver. But what was I expecting? For them to be the same people I'd left behind 3 years ago. A gentle boy trying to find his way in the world and a shy girl hoping for a better life. Of course they wouldn't be. Even if Orochimaru hadn't gotten to them, people changed. They grew up. It was only me who lingered in the past, my every step forward halting and labored. I released Haku without a word and moved on to Karen. She looked away when I took her hand. I understood why immediately. Karen had gained some rather familiar scar patterns. I touched her long sleeves meant to conceal the bite marks. "May I?" I asked. Karen nodded, still not looking at me. I healed the scars. It only took a moment, though there were many. "I'm sorry," I said. "Because of me you were." "Oh, don't give me that," Karen snapped, snatching back her hand. "You're not responsible for everything that happens in the world, you know. TCH. You're almost as arrogant as." There was a sudden burst of unnatural icy wind. "You will show Kyo-sama proper respect, Karen," said Haku, his soft words once again laced with intent. "No, not just intent. Killing intent. Or do you want me to kill you that badly?" "What?" "It's alright, Haku," I said hurriedly. "I don't mind. We're all friends here, right?" Neither one acknowledged me at all, instead staring at each other for a long moment before Karen looked away. "Forgive me, Kyo-sama," she muttered. Yes, of course, I said, looking between them. Was this really Karen and Haku? Karen I could sort of understand. Despite her brief detour to Konoha, she wasn't actually that different from the person she was supposed to become, except that she'd apparently latched onto Itachi rather than Sasuke. But Haku? I had nothing to compare him against. Sure, he'd been raised by Zabuza, the demon of the hidden mist, but he'd been such a kind boy, unwilling to kill Naruto and Sasuke, even when his own life depended on it. How had he become a man who could casually threaten to murder a friend over a few curt words? Or was I the only person who ever thought of us as friends? Kyo-sama, said Haku, interrupting my thoughts. We are here for a purpose. Itachi-sama has requested that we deliver these items to you. Haku produced a bundle of cloth and laid it out onto the ground, pulling out several articles of clothing for my consideration. They included a pale blue shirt, a set of loose black pants, and a pair of knee-high black sandals. There was also a dark blue cloak with long sleeves, a raised collar, and the Uchiha crest sewn on the back. Thank you, these are perfect, I said, pushing aside my misgivings. I hadn't been sure how much of my request Itachi would be able to accommodate, but he'd gotten everything exactly as I'd asked. Let me try these on. I changed quickly in the bower while Haku and Karen waited outside. I could hear Karen whispering something to Haku, but I did my best not to listen. When she fell silent, I stepped out of the bower fully dressed. The cloak I now wore was an open-fronted version of the traditional Uchiha-style robe commonly used by my clan before joining Konoha. Add in a bit of armor, and I'd be dressed for battle. Is there anything else you require, Kyo-sama? Haku asked. I shook my head. No, but I really am sorry for everything that happened, I said. Please forgive me. If I had only. Ugh, I already told you. Interrupted Karen. Stop blaming yourself for everything. None of us knew what was going to happen. That made me pause because well, it wasn't quite true, was it? I might not have known about my abduction, but I had known that Orochimaru would make his offer to Sasuke. It wasn't impossible to guess what might happen if Sasuke chose to accept. If you've got the time and energy to mope around, then think of a way to get out of here. Karen added, watching me closely and seeming to read my mind. Or more likely my chakra since she was a sensor too, and with a jolt, I realized that Karen's apparent annoyance didn't actually match her chakra at all. Instead she felt concerned. For me? Oh. So that was it. After spending most of her life in hidden grass and hidden sound, Karen obviously wouldn't be the type of person to state things plainly or to offer soft words of comfort. Her bluster and annoyance were all an act meant to startle me out of my guilt and to keep me too unbalanced to wallow in misery. Now that I understood, her meaning became clear. I'm glad you're okay. Don't worry. Itachi is protecting us. It's not your fault. Let's get you out of here. Underneath. Karen really was a kunoichi. As was I. Itachi's words from earlier still echoed in my head. I too, always lied to everyone. I acted alone, and this is where my secrets had brought us. But not anymore. Itachi had chosen to face me fully and speak only the truth. It was time for me to do the same. Thank you, Karen, I said, truly grateful. I think I needed to hear that. And I think I might actually have a way out of here. But first, there's something I need you to do for me. The return of my brothers to the kamui dimension didn't take nearly as long as I'd feared it might, but I was still alarmed when Sasuke proceeded to faceplant in front of me immediately after his arrival. Nai-chan. I shouted, rushing to his side. The quick diagnostic jutsu was enough to reveal that he was mostly fine, and cycling healing chakra through his body took care of the minor injuries he'd sustained. The only worrying thing was the fact that his eyes had deteriorated significantly, a clear indication that he'd been overusing his mangyeko Sharingan. I couldn't say that I was surprised though. Eren had mentioned that my brothers were going after Danzo at the 5-Cage summit, so this much was expected. I finished up just in time for Itachi's arrival, which, thankfully, did not result in a faceplant. Sasuke grunted, pushing himself up from the ground and shrugging me off. He gave my new appearance a quick glance but made no comment. I scooted over to Itachi, who kindly knelt and allowed me to heal him as well. What did you want to talk about? Oh good. They'd gotten my message. I'd asked Haku and Karen to subtly let my brothers know that I had something important to tell them and it needed to be done as soon as possible. I took a deep breath and steeled my nerves. There's something I need to tell you that I should have told you a long time ago, I said. I'm not sure how much time we have and this is going to sound impossible, but please listen. I hesitated, but only for a moment. I was born into our family as Uchiha Kyo, but before I was Kyo I was someone else. I'm a reincarnation and in my previous life there was a story. It was a story called Naruto. Manga and an anime didn't really exist in this world, at least not to the same extent as in my previous life, but I was able to get the gist across. I told them the whole story, absolutely everything I could remember from Kagaya's past all the way through the war arc and Sasuke's fight with Naruto. I couldn't meet their gazes, instead staring hard at the ground. I didn't want to see their expressions. I could imagine their looks of disbelief or pity at my obvious insanity. Because who would ever believe something as impossible as my existence? Sasuke and Itachi didn't interrupt me even once during my recitation of the story, a fact that increased my anxiety immensely as my retelling wound down and finally reached its conclusion. I don't know how useful this knowledge is now, I said. People are gone who should still be alive. Gaara. Kankuro. Killer Bee. And people are here who should be gone. Haku. Jiraiya. Nagato. Konan. Itachi. The fate of the world is going to be decided with this war. I thought I was protecting it by trying to keep most things the same. But now so much has changed. It's okay if you don't believe me, but… You knew, said Sasuke. I glanced up, surprised by the unmistakable rage in his voice. When I met his eyes, I saw that they were the red and black of his mangyeko Sharingan. All this time you always knew. There was no disbelief in his gaze. Yes, I said. I always knew. And you didn't do anything. Sasuke snapped, suddenly on his feet. Our clan. Our family. And you. Sasuke, said Itachi, also standing and placing his hand on Sasuke's shoulder. Sasuke swatted his hand away before rounding on Itachi. She knew. He shouted. If she'd done something, Shisui would still be alive. Our clan might have survived. Doesn't that mean anything to you? I flinched at that, but Itachi seemed unfazed. Shisui and I both knew the risks, said Itachi. And we knew what the clan was planning. How could I expect Kyo-chan to save the clan and village when Shisui and I could not? Sasuke's fists clenched and unclenched as sparks of lightning danced between his fingers. With every muscle in his body tense, he turned and stalked to the edge of the platform. I glanced at Itachi, who remained by my side. On each hand I began, not quite sure what I wanted to say. I wanted to ask for forgiveness, but somehow it didn't feel appropriate. Sorry didn't mean much after everything I'd failed to do. Sasuke was right. But they didn't have to forgive me. As long as they knew the truth and could prepare for what was coming, that would be enough. Even if it meant that they would hate me forever. It must have been difficult for you, Itachi said softly. You have carried this burden alone for a very long time. I'm sorry that I did not notice it sooner. I shook my head. How could he possibly look at this situation and think that any of it was his fault? It was because of me, I said. If I'd done something, if I'd told you sooner. Maybe things would have been different. There is little point in wondering what might have been, said Itachi. If is a treacherous word for those with as many regrets as you and I. But because of me, everyone was I trailed off. You have every right to hate me. Itachi let out a slow breath. There was a time when I wanted you to hate me for everything that I had done, he said. I thought that it would ease the burden of my guilt. But when I demanded your hatred, you simply scolded me and told me that it was not for me to decide how you should feel. I was your big brother. You still loved me. And that would not change. So now it is my turn to tell you that you are still my little sister. I still love you. And that will not change. I swallowed the lump in my throat. You don't seem very surprised, I said. I'd expected nothing but disbelief, but both he and Sasuke had accepted my wild, impossible story without a moment of hesitation or doubt. I'm not, said Itachi. You have always known things that you should not have known, and though the source of your knowledge is indeed difficult to accept, it does explain many things. You never acted entirely like a child. Even Sasuke noticed. And Shisui always joked that you were like a little princess reborn into the body of a toddler. I could not disagree with him, though I did not expect his assessment to be quite so accurate. Kyoheim, that was what he had called me. So, what now? I asked, glancing over at where Sasuke still stood. I'll talk to him, said Itachi, straightening. Would you give us a moment? There wasn't much privacy in the kamui dimension, so I retreated to the bower as Itachi made his way over to Sasuke. I tried not to pay attention, but I could still feel the rise and fall of their chakras as they spoke. After some time, Sasuke's chakra calmed and they made their way back. Is there anything else we need to know about? Sasuke asked when he entered, his tone indicating that the answer had better be no. So he was still angry, but at least he was no longer enraged. I shook my head. That's everything, I said. The only thing left to decide is what to do. Isn't it obvious? Sasuke asked. We can use Kakashi's Sharingan to free you from the kamui dimension and then deal with Obito together. Kabuto has already been killed by Haku. That will prevent Madara's revival. Killing Zetsu should prevent everything else. That might not be the best idea, I said slowly. I'd been thinking about possible options and likely futures. If we stop Black Zetsu, the other Otsutsuki will still arrive in the future and their first goal will be to revive Kagaya. Then we'll have to deal with all of them working together. It would be better to defeat Kaguya now when she's the only one we have to worry about. As if that was some small thing and not a potentially world-ending disaster. If that is the case, we will need to facilitate a revival, said Itachi. We'll need Madara as the vessel, the fourth Hokage for his half of the Kyuubi, and the Rinnegan to control the Juubi. Wow, he wasn't going to object. Then again, Itachi had already made it clear that he planned on helping me with whatever decision I made, so maybe I shouldn't be surprised. As for Sasuke, his expression was blank and his eyes were dark and his chakra felt I wasn't quite sure. But Sasuke wasn't objecting either. And we'll need to do it in a way that doesn't result in tens of thousands of deaths, I said, watching Sasuke closely. His eyes narrowed. If the Sage of Six Paths grants me his power to fight Kaguya, then there won't need to be any unnecessary killing, he said blandly. Unnecessary? Whose killing did Sasuke consider necessary? I had a feeling that I already knew. That also explained why he wasn't objecting. He wanted power he could only get from Kaguya's revival. I think Kakashi-sensei and Naruto can be convinced to help us, I said, pushing aside my concerns for the moment. But things might be difficult with a Raikage commanding the allied shinobi forces. I've already killed the Raikage, said Sasuke. What? No. That did make sense. Sasuke's fight with A was supposed to be interrupted by Gaara. But Gaara was dead, and although Temari was strong, she wasn't really Kage level. Without Gaara there to save him, A would be burned alive by amaterasu. Had been burned alive by amaterasu. That thought didn't fill me with the same wave of horror and guilt that I'd felt for Gaara, Kankuro, and Killer Bee. A's death felt dull and distant, like a wound on scar tissue, rather than unmarred skin. Oh, I said, clearing my throat. I've already studied Orochimaru's notes on Ito Tensei, but I don't know where to find the genetic material for Madara. Or the Shinigami mask that can be used to free the Hokage. Perrin will know where to find any DNA samples Kabuto had access to, said Sasuke. She worked with him extensively on all of his projects. And I'm familiar with the Uzumaki clan's mask storage temple, said Itachi thoughtfully. At my puzzled expression, he added, the seals contained within the Uzumaki masks were sometimes used by Anbu for special operations. Well, that would certainly explain why the shrine hadn't been looted despite the absence of an Uzumaki clan to protect it. It just leaves the Rinnegan, I said. Obito intends to retrieve the Rinnegan personally and will do so once we've dealt with Danzo, said Itachi. Yeah, but that wasn't going to end well for Nagato. If Nagato is working with Konoha, he might be willing to help us, I offered. Both of my brothers just looked at me. Okay. Fine. Yeah, convincing Nagato to sacrifice his eyes so that a reincarnated Madara could revive a rabbit goddess trapped in the moon was going to be difficult. And Nagato had just, technically, committed mass genocide against Konoha, even if he had resurrected everyone immediately afterwards. Grunted Sasuke, which was about as much acknowledgement as my statement deserved. If we can retrieve the Rinnegan without killing Nagato, we will do so, said Itachi tactfully. And that was really all I could ask of them. Actually, speaking of unrealistic requests. When you fight Danzo, there's something I'd like you to do. And that marks the end of this part. We still have one more part for this series that's gonna hold another 10 chapters, so don't worry, it's still not over. Thanks for sticking out till the end and also for waiting so long. I love you all. Anyways, I would gladly appreciate every likes, comments and subscribes I could get on this series. It only takes a minute and best of all, you can show your support for absolutely no cost. See you in the next one.